Hello everybody, welcome back to another episode of The Casual Criminalist. Today, a famous one. I'm surprised we haven't covered this yet. It's the disappearance of Madeleine McCann, which is a brutal case. And I don't know, it's complicated and it's long. The script, that is, David's written it. I've never read it before. Of course, I'm familiar with this. I think every British person is familiar with this case. If you're not, you're about to be, because we're going to be here for a little while. The format of the show, if you've not seen this show before, is I've never read this before. We're going to read it together and explore. Let's just dive in, shall we? It was mid-afternoon on April the 28th, 2007, in Praia de Luz, a sun-soaked paradise on the southern coast of Portugal's Algarve region. In English, Praia de Luz means the beach of light. Since the late 1960s, the place has been transformed from an impoverished fishing village to a bustling seaside resort. Although Praia de Luz has a population of just 3,500 residents, approximately 4 times that number visited every single year to swim, sunbathe, drink, and relax. A combination of the warm climate, fair prices, and extensive childcare services made it particularly attractive for middle-class families from Northern Europe. Furthermore, half the population of the town wasn't even Portuguese, with the houses and apartments being bought up by a swarm of British, German, and Dutch expatriates. Yeah, like south of Spain, Algarve in Portugal, pretty famous for just lots of Brits and Germans and apparently Dutch. Generally speaking, these arrivals were either retirees warming their old bones or younger people of an aspirational bent who wanted to boast that they owned a villa in the Algarve. In short, this wasn't just some sleepy coastal village full of retired fishermen. It was an international hub where people of all walks of life came and went. You think they just want to boast? I don't know. I'd like a holiday house. It sounds nice. Like somewhere warm to go in the winter? And you don't need to have old bones to enjoy that. Look, starting a skincare routine, you go to the drugstore and you're like, ooh, that looks good, I'll buy that. And then you go up and it's like, super expensive, but okay, I'm definitely going to stick with it this time. And then 3 days later, you're like, yeah, I'm not doing the face wash with the weird microbeads and whatnot in there. It's just, I'm not doing it. I'm sorry, it's too expensive and I'm too lazy. What you need is a company to make it easier. And that's where today's sponsor, Geology, comes into the picture. Their customized skincare routine takes the guesswork out of it. No complicated setups. It's just effective, proven ingredients that do what they're supposed to do. I've been using it for about a month now. Smoother skin, less oiliness, no dark circles under the eyes, which makes me look less tired. And look, my job is on camera. Is that you don't want to look super tired all the time. Their salicylic acid face wash keeps breakouts under control, retinol night cream helps with fine lines, and it takes less than 2 minutes a day. I spend 4 minutes plus a day brushing my teeth, and you only see my teeth and I'm like, yeah. Take care of your skin, people. Why not? And do it with Geology. Head to geolog.ie/casual70 or scan the QR code on the screen now and use the code casual70 to get 70% off your custom skincare starter set. That's a full month trial for only $12, plus you get a free add-on of your choice. And now back to today's video. In 2007, the perception was that Praia de Luz was a safe little village without much crime. In fact, the seaside resort inevitably attracted petty thieves, drug addicts, and con men, along with the region having a homicide rate twice Portugal's national average. Wait, is this like people thought it was safe, but it turns out it's not at all? Really? The Algarve was also just a hop and a skip away from Morocco, and thus an ideal region for traffickers of guns, drugs, and people to land on the coast and pass on their way to wider Europe. For instance, approximately 70% of cannabis smuggled into Europe passes through the Algarve. No, what is that? That's a lot! Numerous British, Moroccan, and Balkan gangs also have a presence in the region. In addition to this, since 2004, Portuguese police were aware that a sexual predator was operating within a 50-mile radius of Praia de Luz, primarily targeting British tourists, breaking into their holiday apartments at night and assaulting their prepubescent daughters while speaking to them in heavily accented English. The young victims all remarked that he exuded a foul stench. Sounds like a real piece of shit, doesn't he? The British consulate in the Algarve was aware of the threat, but issued no travel warning. Yeah, I mean, travel warnings are very serious business. I don't think because there's one predator that they'd be like, don't travel here. Travel warnings are like, there's a war or there's a genocide going on. Don't go there. They're not like, maybe don't go here because it's crimey. 2 of these nighttime assaults had occurred in Praia de Luz itself. The McCann family were not aware of any of this when they arrived in the resort town. They were an upper-middle-class family of 5. Jerry McCann, originally from Glasgow, was a cardiac specialist. Kate McCann, originally from the suburbs of Liverpool, was a general practitioner. They lived in the Leicestershire village of Rothley, in a large, newly refurbished and comfortable home, and Jerry commuted into the city of Leicester to work. They were both devout Roman Catholics and regular churchgoers. As such, the couple had initially wanted to have a family of 6 or 7 children. However, Kate McCann, already in her mid-30s, had struggled to get pregnant. Through the help of IVF, the couple managed to have their first daughter, Madeleine, on May the 12th, 2003. And again, through IVF, Kate McCann gave birth to twins Sean and Amelie on February 1st, 2005. In the mid-afternoon of April 28th, 2007, the McCanns dropped off their luggage at the Ocean Club, a resort in Praia da Luz owned by Mark Warner Limited. They joined the other members of the party, some of whom had arrived earlier in the day: David and Fiona Payne, Fiona's mother, Diane, Matt and Rachel Oldfield, and Russell O'Brien, and his long-term partner, Jane Tanner. 6 of the 9 adults were doctors. Between the 4 couples in the party, they had 8 small children. The Ocean Club was a mixture of cozy villas and low-rise apartments. The grounds had 4 pools, 5 tennis courts, 2 snack bars, and a tapas restaurant. With its open layout, people could pass from one end of the complex to the other without drawing much attention. This sounds like the sort of place I'd go on holiday. The McCann family rented apartment 5A on the ground floor at the edge of the complex, adjoining 2 roads and nearby one of the swimming pools with the tapas restaurant on the other side. Apartment 5A could be accessed in one of 2 ways. First, from the main entrance to the apartment building, next to the parking lot, and the Rua de Agostinho de Silva. This led to apartment 5A's front door, which the McCanns typically locked. I'm just wondering, is it a secure resort? Because I don't know, everywhere I go, there's always every time you drive in, there's a man in a little guard hut and he has to raise a thing after you tell him your room number. I don't think a smelly predator could just roll into a resort. The second way was through a small wrought iron gate on the side of the building that opened directly onto the Rua de Francisco Gentil Martins and led to a pathway behind the entire building. On the immediate right was apartment 5A's patio. The apartment could be accessed via sliding doors the McCanns typically left unlocked. Thus anyone could wander off the public street and access their apartment in just a few paces. Okay, so it's right on a public street, so it's not a secure area. 5A had 2 bedrooms. One of them was used by Jerry and Kate McCann, who pushed 2 single beds together. The other was occupied by their 3 children. 2-year-old Sean and Amelie slept on travel cots in the middle of the room. 3-year-old Madeleine slept on a single bed. A second bed in the room was occupied by no one. The children's room had a window which looked out onto the parking lot at the front of the building. The window had curtains, a glass pane that opened outward onto the street, and metal shutters that sealed tight when closed. Jerry and Kate McCann said they always kept the window in the children's room closed, with the shutters down and the curtains drawn. The shutters could be opened with a pull string inside the bedroom. The metal shutters and window pane could not be opened from the outside without forcing them and making a fair amount of noise. Okay, but where were the sliding doors? The sliding doors were unlocked, and I think that becomes important because I know something about this case. But so access to this bedroom from the street, the windows are closed, so it's going to be the sliding doors where someone could get in. The first 5 days of the McCann's holiday followed a similar pattern. Each morning, they dropped off their children at the daycare service or creche provided by the Ocean Club. Then Jerry and Kate McCann enjoyed a day of relaxing in the sun, swimming in the ocean, attending tennis lessons, and going for long, arduous runs. Both of them were fairly into sport and fitness, Jerry most of all. This sounds nice. It does sound like the sort of holiday I go on. I thought these kids would be too young to put in the creche. We typically put it, I don't know, I don't want it. I'd put my kids in the creche more than my wife would. But we spend we'll do half a day, put the kids in the creche and relax, and then half a day, doing some activities with the kids or something. Because I don't want to, holidays for them as well, I guess. Although they love, I don't call it a kids club, but they love the kids club. They're always going, can we go back? Can we go back? And it's you don't want to spend time together. It's no, I made friends. It's okay. A preview of things to come. The McCanns picked up their children at lunchtime so they could all eat together. Then the youngsters got put back into daycare so Kate and Jerry could have the rest of the afternoon to themselves. McCanns would pick up their children at 5 or 6 p.m. and take them back to apartment 5A for a 7 p.m. bedtime. The children's nighttime routine was to play for a little bit, then get into their pajamas, drink a glass of milk, and fall asleep to bedtime stories. Yeah, this is uncomfortably close to how my life is. Then Kate and Jerry would get ready to go out for the evening, while they both enjoyed a glass of wine in the room. The whole getting ready ritual was usually stretched out over 90 minutes. Then they headed down to the tapas restaurant, where after the first 2 days of staying there, Rachel Oldfield had reserved a table for the entire party of 9 adults at 8:30 p.m. every day for the rest of the week. It was later discovered that, as an explanation to her manager, the hostess had left the reservation and a note about how the parents wanted to be close to their kids sleeping alone in the apartments on the front desk. For days, it was visible to anyone skulking around the pool area. It's possible that this is where an abductor got the idea to target the McCanns. This is something I wouldn't do. I don't know if it's because things and how you do this with your children have changed because of this very case that we're going through today, but I wouldn't leave my kids in the hotel room alone and then leave the building. I don't think we'd even pop downstairs like to a bar in the building. If we're in like a hotel block, we'd have someone from the hotel stay with them. The tapas restaurant was located about 60 yards or 55 meters away from apartment 5A on the other side of the swimming pool. So it's not very far. I mean, I have to say I wouldn't necessarily be worried about predators and stuff because I'd lock the doors. I'd be more worried about fire. Like if there was a fire that broke out, then you'd have to get there real quick, get into the building, get the kids out. And I think that to me is probably a more statistically likely risk. That's what concerns me. The back of the apartment was partially visible through some thick plastic weather sheeting separating the restaurant from the pool, and then over the hedge separating the pool from the back of the apartment block. While this technically meant that the McCanns could look at the apartment from where they sat at dinner, you couldn't really get a good look at the place, nor have any idea of what was going on inside of it. Wait, they don't have a monitor? This is like 2006? When was this happening? 2006, 2007? What did we say? Like around that time. Like today, if we did consider doing that, which we don't do, we definitely have like a smart monitor. So it tells you you can see what's going on with your kids on your phone, and it'll tell you if there's any movement. But this is, this is 20 years ago. The quickest route to and from apartment 5A was 90 yards or 82 meters around the pool onto the public road and through a wrought iron gate. At a reasonable pace, the walk took less than a minute. Okay. I mean, this seems like it doesn't seem far. I think times have changed, as I said, because of this case. But I think reasonably, that's not an unreasonable distance to go from your children. At a reasonable pace, less than a minute. So if you sprinted it, it would take you like 20 seconds. The Ocean Club actually provided a night creche service for its guests so they could go out in the evenings without leaving their kids alone in their rooms. Yeah, but night creche just means you're putting your kids to bed until really late. And that's going to be miserable. Like you finished dinner, you had some wine, and you're like, great, now I got to go collect the kids and put them to bed. The kids would be entertained with games and movies, and when they got sleepy, they were put into comfy beds in a private area until their parents returned. Whoa! I got to find a place with a night creche. They got little beds? Holy shit, I got to find a resort like that. I've only ever come across day creches before. Because then you could just pick them up, like carry them back to beds, and keep your fingers crossed that they just go to sleep in their own beds. Sometimes that goes terribly wrong. Like where the kids are falling asleep in the car and you're like, yes, perfect. And then you get home and you're transferring them to bed. My daughter, we did this the other day. My daughter's like, Dad, I'm hungry. And I'm like, oh God, no. And then it takes you got to go through the whole bedtime procedure. Because then she's like, Dad, I haven't brushed my teeth. Dad, I haven't gone into my pajamas. Dad, we haven't read a story. It's like, oh no. I sound like a terrible parent. I love my kids, but I also like time by myself in the evening. Many parents at the Ocean Club availed themselves of this service, but the McCann party did not like the idea of the night creche. Kate McCann felt that it would interfere with the children's habitual 7 p.m. bedtime, and she thought that once the children went to sleep in the quiet area, they would be constantly woken up by other adults picking up their own children as the evening went on. The other parents in the McCann party agreed. Yeah, not unreasonable. Instead, the group decided to leave their 8 children asleep in their apartments. David and Fiona Payne had a baby monitor. The rest of the McCann party worked out a system where they would leave dinner and check on their kids at regular intervals. Why not just have a baby monitor? There's obviously so they have baby monitors. The 6 parents claimed that they would each get up from the table and check on their own children every 20 to 30 minutes, staggered so only 1 or 2 people were away at any given time. With 6 people individually performing checks, this meant that only a few minutes would pass before someone walked away from the table again. Occasionally, a member of the McCann party would volunteer to check on their friends' kids for them. This routine apparently carried on for hours until about 11 p.m. or midnight. This seems like a good system. This seems fair. I feel like there's quite a bit of judgment if I remember correctly, about on the McCanns for this. And I don't think this is unreasonable at all. I mean, it's not something I would do, but I think that's because times have changed because of this. It should be noted that the staff at the tapas restaurant did not notice this flurry of comings and goings over the course of multiple evenings. We only have the word of the McCann party that these checks were actually as diligent and punctual as they said they were. According to some Portuguese investigators, it was possible that the McCann party exaggerated the frequency with which they would check on their kids in order to avoid accusations of negligence. Yeah, but that is very much alleged. Other accusations from law enforcement extended to the group of mostly doctors actually sedating their children so that they could stay out for 3 or 4 hours drinking, with their casual checks being far less frequent, allegedly. Sedating their children. What? Giving them, like, drugs? Like, what's going on? This seems very alleged. This seems... look, my initial thing there is like, it sounds like law enforcement failed these people because one of their kids got abducted. And now they're just looking for excuses. Allegedly as well. The Ocean Club staff described the McCann party as, quote, moderate drinkers, while other witnesses have characterized them as excessive drinkers. This is going to depend on how you define things. And also, people are different. Like, I drink more on holiday, for sure. Like, without question. I'll drink every day. Like, you're just like, why not? I'm on holiday. Hey! I don't know. I guess some people call it... I'd call myself moderate drinker on holiday, I guess. Not excessive. I'm not getting drunk. But in fairness, it really depends on your definition of either, right on. On the night of May the 2nd, the McCann party met at a tapas restaurant and drank wine for 3 hours before moving to the hotel bar to drink almond liqueurs, the closest thing they had to amaretto. According to Kate McCann, their last check on the children was at 11:05. Around 11:50, the longest stated gap without checking on the kids, Jerry abruptly got up and went to bed. Kate felt slighted by his sudden departure and followed a few minutes later. Arriving back at apartment 5A, Kate said she found Jerry already asleep and snoring. She was angered by this and spent the night in the unoccupied bed in the children's room. Seems a bit much. I just feel like I'm tired to go to bed. Sorry. The rest of the McCann party left the bar soon after at around 12:20 a.m. This was the latest that they'd ever stayed out. Are there not security cameras in these resorts? I feel, again, I guess there's lots changed in like 20 years, but I'd be very surprised if there wasn't security cameras. The next morning, May the 3rd, 2007, just 9 days shy of Madeleine McCann's 4th birthday, the family was sitting at breakfast when the little girl piped up. Madeleine asked her mother, "Why didn't you come when Sean and I cried last night?" Kate McCann asked Madeleine when she and Sean had been crying and why. But by that point, Madeleine got distracted by something else and the conversation shifted to another topic. Kate McCann later stated that she thought it highly improbable that Madeleine and Sean could have been woken up in between their routine checks from the restaurant and bar because their children, quote, rarely stir at all at the night, but if they do, it was hardly ever, and I mean ever, before the early hours of the morning. Madeleine's question later raised the possibility that an intruder may have been in the apartment on the evening of May 2nd and had woken up the children before departing again. At breakfast, Kate McCann also noticed that Madeleine had an unexplained brown stain on her nightshirt. Additionally, a witness who lived in the apartment directly above the McCanns claimed that during the afternoon of May 3rd, she saw a man come from the direction of the McCanns' apartment and leave via the iron-wrought gate onto the public road, taking care to close it quietly. All this plays into the theory that a predator had been scouting apartment 5A for a few days before striking. Yeah, I think so. That seems very reasonable of an assumption. Alternately, Kate's incredulity that her kids could have possibly woken up when she and Jerry were at the restaurant and bar, and a statement that her 2- and 3-year-old kids rarely stirred at night, unfortunately also fed accusations that the McCanns were in the practice of sedating their children so they could go out for the evening. That's insane. That's insane. My kids rarely stir. Well, look, I have no reason to make shit up. And I would say we put our kids to bed at about 7:38, so a little bit later than them. They almost never fucking stir and never have, other than when they were actual like newborns, until the early hours of the morning. Like the earliest will be like 1 or 2, but typically 4 or 5, maybe 3. That's when they'll stir. But that first part of the night, they always sleep through. Amount of sedation I do with my kids? Fucking none. Obviously. This seems like a fucking absolutely baseless accusation. Madeleine spent the morning of May 3rd in the Ocean Club daycare as usual. That day, the hotel nanny, Kat Baker, took the kids for a boat ride. Baker reports that Madeleine was scared of the boat at first, but soon got used to it, remaining aboard when they returned to shore. Madeleine and her siblings were picked up by the McCanns for lunch, and then the family spent some time in the swimming pool together. This is where the last known photograph of Madeleine McCann was taken. She was returned to daycare, played various games, and practiced a dance routine that some of the kids were going to perform the next day. When the McCanns collected their children from daycare at around 5:30 p.m., Madeleine looked pale and was so tired that she asked her mother to carry her back to apartment 5A. Kate and Jerry bathed the kids, and just before 6 p.m., Jerry left to play tennis with David Payne, Matt Oldfield, and Russ O'Brien. That sounds nice. Go to play tennis with your mates. That does sound good. I should go on holiday with my friends. It's just my family. It sounds kind of fun to go and play some tennis with your mates while you're on holiday. Kate says that she gave the kids milk, a biscuit, and some crisps. While the kids played in the living room, Kate says she popped in the shower, emerging at around 6:40 p.m. At that point, David Payne popped his head in the patio door and asked if the kids would like to go down to the play area. Kate replied that the kids were tired and were going to bed soon. Payne returned to the tennis court. According to Kate McCann, she then sat down on the couch with her kids, with Madeleine dozing in her lap while Kate read them a story. Madeleine asked to try on Kate's engagement ring, something the little girl regularly liked to do. Kate says that just before 7 p.m., Jerry returned from tennis. The couple put their children to bed, and Kate read them one last story. Madeleine fell asleep before the story's conclusion. Jerry and Kate gave their children goodnight kisses. All so far so normal. According to the McCanns, between 7:15 and 7:30, Jerry took a shower while Kate did her hair and makeup. Then, from 7:30 to 8:30, the McCanns say they had a glass of wine and talked. A few minutes past 8:30, they checked on the kids one last time and headed to the tapas restaurant. The McCanns were the first couple to arrive, and over the next 10 minutes, they were gradually joined by the 7 others. According to testimony, Matt Oldfield got up to do the first check on the kids at around 8:55, so we're thinking... Oh, it's very soon after they arrived, less than 15 minutes after his arrival. On the way back, Oldfield said he stopped outside apartment 5A and listened at the window. All was quiet. Then, according to testimony, Jerry got up from the table at 9:05 p.m. and returned to apartment 5A. He looked in the children's bedroom and found all 3 of them asleep. Jerry recalls having a, quote, proud father moment when he looked at them. Then Jerry McCann returned to the restaurant. Kate McCann had emphasized that Madeleine's comments that morning about her crying made them anxious, which is why they were able to so accurately remember the timing of their checks that night. On the way back, Jerry stopped to talk with another tourist on the Rua de Francisco Gentil Martins, just outside the wrought iron gate. He was passed by Jane Tanner, who had left the table around 9:10 or 9:15 to check on her daughter. Jerry does not remember seeing Tanner, but she recalls seeing Jerry on the street. Walking a little further, Jane Tanner saw a man carrying an unconscious girl about Madeleine's age across the junction of the Rua Martins and Rua de Silva in front of her. The man carried the girl horizontally in his arms rather than her head resting on his shoulder, which struck Tanner as odd. The little girl wore pajamas that were similar in appearance to the ones worn by Madeleine McCann. Again, in retrospect, this seems extremely suspicious. But in reality, it'd just be like, oh, it's just a man carrying a child in their pajamas. Like, it happens. Though this sighting was for years taken as significant, implying Jane Tanner had seen the kidnapper, in 2013 it was determined that she'd seen a British tourist returning with his young daughter from the night crash. Exactly. Yeah, and I feel like carrying the kid horizontal from the night crash, that could even be a better position, because you're like, okay, scoop them up like this, carry them to bed, put them down like this. If you're like tilting them and putting them up, putting the head on the shoulder, I feel like that could disturb them more. The man came forward and was conclusively identified, including matching him to a side profile sketch taken from Jane Tanner. I mention this here because there are enough intangibles in this case without the audience wasting brain power on this particular red herring. At 9:25 p.m., Matt Oldfield and Russ O'Brien got up to check on their kids. It had been 30 minutes since Oldfield had last checked on his children, but it had only been about 10 minutes since O'Brien's partner, Jane Tanner, had returned from checking on their daughter, which struck some law enforcement as a tad overzealous. Matt Oldfield also volunteered to check on apartment 5A so Kate McCann could remain seated. This time, Oldfield entered the apartment and peered into the door of the children's bedroom. The door was ajar, but Oldfield did not go in to get a full look. He recalled seeing a bit of light in the room, which was odd because the window was supposed to be closed. Oldfield said he heard a noise like one of the children turning over. It's now speculated that Oldfield had actually heard an intruder. Oldfield returned to the table at approximately 9:30 p.m. Around 10 p.m., though the exact time is highly uncertain, Irish tourists Martin and Mary Smith saw a man about 500 yards or 460 meters from apartment 5A carrying a girl fitting Madeleine McCann's description down the Rua de Escola Primaria toward the beach. In 2007, Martin Smith identified this man as Jerry McCann, but several staff and patrons at the restaurant confirmed Jerry was there at 10 p.m. Yeah, eyewitness testimony is horribly unreliable, just as demonstrated by that. He can't be in two places at once. In 2008 and 2013, Smith described the man as mid-30s, about 5'7 to 5'9, and, quote, he did not look like a tourist and looked uncomfortable carrying the child. That seems way more suspect than the first one. Also at around 10 p.m., about a half hour after Matt Oldfield checked on apartment 5A, Kate McCann got up from the table. Kate said that she entered the apartment through the unlocked patio doors. She also testified that upon entering the apartment, she noticed that the door to the children's bedroom was wide open, but as she approached to close it, the door slammed shut as if blown by a draft. Kate McCann claims that when she opened the door again, she noticed that the bedroom window was wide open, the curtains parted and the shutters raised. Sean and Amelie were still asleep on the cots in the middle of the room, but Madeleine's bed was empty. The sheets had been thrown back and a stuffed animal, cuddle cat, rested on the pillow. Kate McCann said she initially thought Madeleine had gone to sleep in her and Jerry's bed, very reasonable assumption, but it was empty. She returned to the children's room and frantically searched for Madeleine, including looking under the bed, despite the fact that the mattress was only about an inch or two above the floor. Then she says she quickly searched the rest of the apartment. Not able to find her daughter, Kate ran back to the pool and restaurant area, reportedly shouting, "Madeleine's gone." Jerry's initial reaction was, she can't be gone. Then reality hit like a freight train. Over the course of the next few minutes, Kate's cries evolved into, "They've taken her," then, "The fucking bastards have taken her." The cries were interspersed with sobbing and howls of anguish. Jerry McCann later told police, quote, "Never in my life have I ever heard her cry like that." And so began one of the most notorious abduction cases in British history. Or to put it in the words of Kate McCann, that is when the nightmare started. God. Yeah, I don't know, man. Like, I got kids, say similar ages, and I just can't even imagine. I mean, I remember when I was a kid, or a teenager, when this came out, when this case was around. And I remember just thinking how intense it must be then. And now it's just even more so, isn't it? First response. While Kate McCann seemed to immediately jump to the conclusion that Madeleine had been abducted, her friends clung to the idea that Madeleine had merely woken up and wandered off through the patio doors or gone out the bedroom window. Yeah, I think I would probably be in this camp. I'd be like, let's not assume something really unlikely until the more likely things have been ruled out. So lock down the resort or whatever they do at these places, sweep it, hopefully find the child, meanwhile call the police, take the actions that would be appropriate for the worst case scenario, but I'd definitely be assuming she's probably just around the corner. But I can understand why you would be very concerned. You don't know. I don't know how I would react. I'd like to think I'd keep a cool head and just apply logic to fix the situation. But it's hard to know, isn't it? Meanwhile, the Paynes, Oldfields, and Russ O'Brien split up to search the resort complex and the surrounding neighborhood. Jane Tanner was checking on her own daughter at the time, but soon joined the search. While all of this was going on, Jerry and Kate McCann had returned to apartment 5A. Kate was screaming, kicking, and punching walls, repeating, "I've let her down. We've let her down, Jerry." Noise was enough to attract the attention of the upstairs neighbor, who called over the balcony asking what was going on. Jerry shouted back that their daughter had been abducted. When Ross O'Brien returned to apartment 5A after roughly half an hour's search, he found Kate McCann in hysterics and Jerry McCann lying on the floor, quote, crying like a baby. When Matt Oldfield returned to the apartment, Jerry collected himself for long enough to tell Oldfield to go to the front desk and get them to phone the police. The call went through at 10:41 p.m. When was the... Okay, so 10 p.m. was when she discovered her missing. 10:41 is when the call goes through to the police. I would have immediately called the police. Again, like, hope for the best, plan for the worst. Just in case, immediately front desk, call the police. I did this on a couple of holidays ago. My kid had an allergic reaction to sesame seeds. Apparently, she's, or we assume it was because she's allergic to sesame seeds. And then she just starts having an allergic reaction. Like, just starts, like, her body's, like, all, like, suddenly, I'm like, oh my God. My wife's like, oh my God, what do we do? And I'm like, call an ambulance. So I just called to reception. I'm like, need an ambulance. And they're like, we'll call an ambulance. And then the ambulance comes. But it's like, yeah, you gotta, I don't know. Like, I know my reaction in that situation. I'd call the police immediately. Or I'd call the reception and be like, you need to call the police now. The Portuguese authorities would later find it odd that the McCanns spent the first 40 minutes after their daughter's disappearance crying in the apartment and not racing around actively looking for their child. Yeah, I do find that odd. I'll also, of course, excuse it as completely... You don't know what your response will be. And even though I said I do, I don't. They would later allege that the McCanns shouting and crying was a performance. Others have pointed out that the shock and trauma of a child abduction hits different people in different ways. It's fucking insane. I don't understand. Like, were the Portuguese authorities, so incompetent that they're coming up with excuses? This seems outrageous. Shortly after calling the police, the Ocean Club initiated its missing child protocol. The staff fanned out across the property looking for Madeleine. They were joined by concerned locals and tourists, eventually amounting to a search party of about 60 people. 2 hotel nannies arrived at apartment 5A to offer help and comfort. They too found Kate and Jerry McCann in quite a state. The couple angrily demanded to know where the police were. Yeah, again, not an unreasonable response. It's only been 11 minutes. But still, I can understand their anger. It's misplaced. It's only been 10 minutes, but it's still, I can understand it. They were met at reception by senior hotel staff, Matt Oldfield, and Jerry McCann, who had come down from apartment 5A. Officer Nelson Costa and hotel staff member Sylvia Batista both testified that at this point, Jerry McCann, quote, knelt down and slammed his 2 hands on the floor like a praying Arab, screaming twice in indescribable anguish. Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine. I can't imagine. The 2 police officers headed to apartment 5A. As per protocol, they searched the residence to confirm that Madeleine was no longer there. Officer Jose Roque noted that the shutters to the window of the room were lowered, leaving about the width of a hand between them and the windowsill. Kate McCann later stated that after returning to apartment 5A, Jerry had lowered the shutters again. Indeed, so many people had moved in and out of the apartment after Madeleine's disappearance that it was impossible to preserve the crime scene. Nevertheless, on the orders of their desk sergeant back in Lagos, the 2 officers attempted to stop any further disturbance. While police conducted their search, Officer Roque noticed Jerry and Kate McCann knelt down on the floor of their bedroom, putting their heads down on their bed, crying and praying. Oh yeah, they're very religious, right? Officer Roque also noted in his report how it was odd that amid all the hubbub, with 20 people coming and going, with the parents screaming and crying, and with Kate McCann previously punching and kicking the walls, that the 2-year-old twins, Sean and Amelie, were still fast asleep. Indeed, they would not wake up for the rest of the night, fueling speculation that the McCanns had sedated their children. I don't like that. I don't like that speculation. I feel like that is a major accusation that you should have some fucking evidence for. Much later, Kate McCann would offer the explanation that perhaps it was the abductor who had drugged the children before taking Madeleine. Or maybe they just sleep deeply, like sometimes kids are hard to wake up. Around midnight, the desk sergeant arrived from Lagos, and shortly thereafter, 4 more officers. They mostly focused their efforts on patrolling the area looking for Madeleine. All the officers to arrive so far were part of the Guardia Nacional Republicana, or GNR. At 12:10 a.m., they decided to contact the Policia Judiciaria, or PJ, who handled more serious crime. The head of the local PJ unit, Gonzalo Amaral, was 20 miles away in Portimao. He was informed of the disappearance as he ate a late-night dinner. At midnight? Very late-night dinner. He dispatched 2 investigators to the Ocean Club. Around 1 a.m., the PJ investigators arrived and despaired at the lack of preservation of the scene. An hour later, the GNR brought in 2 German Shepherds. These particular 2 dogs were not specialized trackers, but they were given Madeleine's blanket to try and catch her scent. Unfortunately, they couldn't get a whiff of the child anywhere outside of the apartment. Well, because they're not tracker dogs. Where are the tracker dogs? While all this was going on, Kate and Jerry were busy on the telephone. First, Jerry called his sister. Then he called the Foreign Office in London, the British Consulate in the Algarve, and the British Embassy in Lisbon. Wow, I feel like my first call would be the Embassy, then the Consulate, then the Foreign Office, and then my sister. Up to you though, dude. Then Jerry called Kate's aunt and uncle in Rosalie and asked them to start praying for Madeleine. Then Jerry phoned Kate's parents to tell them what was going on. Meanwhile, Kate had asked the hotel staff to find a priest to come over and pray with her. Religious people gonna do religious things. I'm kind of like, how about we do something proactive? But they think praying is proactive, so, up to them. They could not locate one, so at around 2 a.m., Kate phoned the priest in England who had married them and baptized Madeleine. Then Kate called her best friend, Michelle. Jerry got an upstairs neighbour to email Sky News in the UK. At 3 a.m., Rachel Oldfield contacted the BBC. A few hours later, they got hold of ITV. This is a good plan. Getting it out of the news as much as possible, getting her picture all over the place. Get this in Portuguese news as well. Get her picture out ASAP. This is a very good plan. At 4 a.m., the McCanns were moved out of apartment 5A. Wait, they should have, as soon as the police arrived, they should be like, all right, out, get to another room, and we're preserving this room. Like, leave everything, go somewhere else, we'll have the hotel sort you out. They were taken to David and Fiona Payne's apartment at the other end of the complex to get a few hours sleep. Along the way, Kate McCann complained bitterly that the hotel staff had not been able to locate a Catholic priest. I mean, people have weird reactions, that's a bit much, but Of course, it's a crazy situation to be in. According to Fiona Payne, Kate used some extremely foul language that Fiona wouldn't repeat. I mean, yeah, what do you want to read into that? Her kid's just been abducted. The twins, Sean and Amelie, were carried to the Payne's apartment by a nanny and a policeman. Both of the children were still fast asleep and did not even stir momentarily when strangers picked them up. I am not jumping to any conclusions yet. That is a lot of movement and activity to sleep through. That is a lot. But I mean, it is... What was it? Like, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence? It's an extraordinary claim, and the evidence is not yet extraordinary. Before Jerry tried to get some rest, he headed down to the beach with Matt Oldfield, where Jerry burst into tears. Then Jerry returned to the Payne's apartment. The first 6 hours after Madeleine's disappearance were spent searching apartment 5A, the resort complex, and the surrounding neighborhood. There was no methodical search of the rest of Praia de Luge or the outskirts, and roadblocks were certainly not set up at this time. It should be noted that if a human trafficker abducted Madeleine, it was less than 90 minutes' drive to the Spanish border, and from there, one could cross over to Morocco or pass into the rest of Europe. You've got roadblocks. What's going on in roadblocks? I mean, once you're across the border, it's going to be much more difficult. Once you're in Morocco, you're done. Like, you're in Africa. Things are different there. Anguish. The following morning, May 4th, 2007, the search resumed with the benefit of daylight. Hotel staff printed missing posters with Madeleine McCann's picture and distributed them all over Praia de Luge. The first news stories of Madeleine's disappearance hit the airwaves at 7:30 a.m. on British and Portuguese television. That morning, only a handful of reporters arrived to cover the story. A few Portuguese, one British newspaper journalist, and one correspondent for the BBC. At the time, the journalists present had reasonable hopes that the little girl would be found in a few hours, having wandered off into the night. They did not expect the disappearance to escalate into a major story. After an hour or two in the Payne's apartment, during which Jerry slept and Kate did not, they got up. At 5 or 6 a.m., they walked along the beach and through the brush, looking for their daughter. At 9 a.m., the McCanns waited in the parking lot for the PJ investigators to return. Reporters there saw Kate burst into tears. A forensics team arrived, and a technician would later spark controversy for dusting the window shutters of apartment 5A for fingerprints without wearing gloves. While the McCann party stood in the parking lot, Russ O'Brien and Kate McCann were approached by a man named Robert Murat, half British, half Portuguese, who lived in Praia de Luge with his mother and spoke both languages fluently. This sounds like a useful person. He volunteered to be a translator between the McCanns and the police. Well, that's very nice and seems like it's going to be very useful. Brian put Murat's number into his phone. Robert Murat gradually introduced himself to the police, hotel staff, journalists, and volunteers present and made similar offers. Meanwhile, O'Brien set about the task of finding Kate a Catholic priest. One could not be found, so Kate McCann settled on an Anglican who had recently arrived in Portugal with his wife. They soon became friends. At 10 a.m., police roadblocks were finally established around the day. It's 12 hours later! 12 hours after her disappearance. An Interpol missing persons alert was issued at 11:05. Holy shit, this was on Sky News at 3 in the morning, and we're not getting an Interpol missing person until 11:05? We're not getting roadblocks until 10? So far, there seems to be a lot of, did the McCanns do that? Did the McCanns do this? And honestly, it just seems like the Portuguese police, surprise for casual criminalist, kind of a bit shit. A PJ investigator arrived and drove Jerry and Kate McCann into Portimao to take their official statements. They were greeted at police headquarters by the British consul Bill Henderson. When Kate was giving her statement, she was asked, "Is this your first visit to Portugal?" She replied icily, "Yes, and it will be my last." Oh no, it won't. You're involved in a very, very major situation right now, which is going to be involving you not leaving Portugal, and it's not going to be a good time, but you are coming back. Much of Jerry and Kate's statements concerned the man Jane Tanner had seen carrying an unconscious girl at 9:15 the night before. Jerry demanded he be found and arrested. As we now know, this was merely a British tourist with his own daughter. The interviews of Jerry and Kate McCann lasted for 4 hours, after which they waited while other members of their party were questioned. It was not until 7:30 p.m. that an officer drove the McCanns back to Praia de Luge. Returning to the resort, the McCanns found the number of journalists outside the Ocean Club had grown. The story of a young British girl, the daughter of 2 respectable doctors, being snatched from a hotel room while on holiday had begun to resonate with the public. The McCanns sought refuge from the journalists inside the Payne's apartment. They were greeted by Kate's parents, who had caught the first available flight from Liverpool, and a couple of British diplomats. After some discussion, Jerry decided to go out and talk to the press. He and Kate walked out of the apartment, Kate clutching Madeleine's cuddle cat in her hands and Jerry occasionally putting his arm around his wife. Jerry's demeanor was fairly stoic given the circumstances, and he spoke clearly and articulately, as would be the case in their many press appearances going forward. Yeah, I think I would be the same way. Because it's like, you've got to separate. You've got to be like, this is what we need done, and this is what we need done now, and you've got to process your emotions at a different time. This is really fine, and I think it's appropriate. Kate looked like she'd been crying and was on the verge of lapsing into tears again. Jerry looked up from his notes directly at the journalists assembled. Kate looked mostly at the ground. Jerry McCann said, quote, "Words cannot describe the anguish and despair that we're feeling as the parents of our beautiful daughter. We request that anyone with information, no matter how trivial, contact the Portuguese police and help us get her back safely. Please, if you have Madeleine, let her come home to her mummy, daddy, brother and sister." I don't know. This is fucking awful. The first press conference further intensified public and media interest in the disappearance. A handsome, well-to-do couple were in pieces because they'd lost their daughter on holiday. One journalist summed up the press conference with the phrase, "There, but for the grace of God, go I." When a child goes missing, and there are a sickening number of cases in any region, they usually receive very sparse and transient public attention. Usually press coverage is confined to local media, not rising to national or international levels. But every so often, about 1 in 1,000, the media and the public seizes on a particular case that seems to resonate with people on a visceral level. Yeah, and Jerry and, his wife, Kate, they are doing a very good job of working themselves to be that 1 in 1,000. Getting the media involved, getting word out, just doing as much as possible. A common trend is the missing cases that catch on often involve girls from middle or upper class families going missing from seemingly safe environments. Yeah, that's something you can't really control, but I can see that. It is less common for boys, for the kids of either sex from lower class families, and for those living in environments that could be described as rough or unsafe. Ethnicity can also be a factor, but this varies from country to country. The disappearance of Madeleine McCann, on the other hand, swiftly attained immense international attention, the likes of which had never been seen. The McCann press conference was played over and over, and within days, Madeleine McCann's picture was printed in newspapers on literally every continent. The Portuguese police were appalled at how quickly the story gained traction, believing that the flood of journalists, onlookers, and bogus tips would hamper their investigation. I fucking disagree. I think having her picture everywhere is enormously helpful. It's just, isn't it? I don't want an investigation at this point. I want her back. I'm not interested in catching the guy at that point. I'm interested in getting her back. And if the police want to catch the guy later, fine. But right now, I want a picture everywhere. There was also a more grim consideration. If Madeleine had been abducted by human traffickers, she had suddenly become the most recognizable girl on the planet. While it increased the chance of Madeleine being spotted, it might also prompt her abductors to kill her and dispose of her body rather than trying to transport or sell her. The same danger applied to an individual lunatic who'd abducted her and was either trying to move cross-country or keep her captive in the local area. Okay, fair play, I didn't think of that. From their first phone calls to the UK media on the night of the disappearance, the McCanns fell firmly behind the idea that publicity increased the likelihood that Madeleine would be found. But it's a very real possibility, as public attention reached fever pitch, that it may have hastened her death. What are you supposed to fucking do? A faceless man. That night, 24 hours after the abduction, the Policia Judiciaria investigators sat in the crisis center in Praia de Luz and discussed their progress so far. They had papered the walls of the crisis center with graphs, flowcharts, timelines, witness statements, photographs, and lists of pending and completed tasks for the officers on the ground. In the middle of the documentation, they put up a picture of Madeleine McCann to, quote, "remind us always of our mission's objective." Many of the investigators present felt that the McCann story did not add up, and they were by no means certain that Madeleine McCann had actually been abducted. Chief Investigator Gonçalo Amaro requested background checks on the McCanns and their friends from the British police liaison in Lisbon. It took several days for those to arrive. In Amaro's opinion, given the implications, the British authorities seemed reluctant to supply them. Wait, they're doctors. If they've got a criminal background, I don't think you can be a doctor, can you? That's not going to be okay. Especially for a serious crime. If they've got speeding tickets or whatever, then it's not going to count. Meanwhile, at 11 p.m, David Payne called the Metropolitan Police in London. Nothing came of the call at the time, but it reflected the mounting frustration of the McCann party with the perceived lack of progress made by the Portuguese authorities. Yeah, you'd be enormously frustrated as someone who hasn't done anything to your own daughter, and the Portuguese police are like, yeah, but maybe you did. Just be like, go fucking find the person who did! I'd be fucking furious. At midnight, Kate tried to get in touch with the head of the PJ in South Portugal who had promised to take her calls. She couldn't reach him. Kate flew into a rage, kicked to bed, and broke it. She then phoned a friend of hers in the UK and commented that, judging from the response of the Portuguese police, you'd think that she'd lost a dog. The idea of Portuguese incompetence and inactivity was an impression that stuck, both with the McCanns and with much of the British press and public. Yeah, I mean, I can see why, guys. However, when the files of the initial investigation were unsealed a year later in 2008, British and Portuguese legal analysts and law enforcement generally agreed that within those first few days, the Polizia Judiciaria had actually been fairly tireless in their activities. Okay, I'm only going on what I'm presented with here, and it does seem like their response doesn't seem very good. But legal analysts came later, and it seems that we were mistaken, and that's fine. I'm happy to be mistaken. I saw what I had here, and now I have something more, fine. Experts also agree it was unreasonable to expect roadblocks to be set up in a missing child's case with no sign of foul play much earlier than they were. Okay, seems a little bit unreasonable to me, but I don't know. I guess that's just me. I'm not a policeman, not a legal expert. On May 5th, the Portuguese police expanded the search area to 29 square miles around Praia da Luz and then to 96 square miles. The search involved around 80 officers taking on whatever volunteers they could find. They combed the town, the countryside, looking for any sign of Madeleine McCann or her remains. The fire service scoured the scrubland. Divers examined the coastal waters and the Bravura Dam 9 miles north of Praia da Luz. More than 400 houses and apartments were searched. The police conducted random stops around the town to create uncertainty for anyone trying to transport McCann out of the area. Over 700 people were questioned. The full fury of the ground search continued for a week and then tapered off into more focused investigations. Meanwhile, forensic technicians scrutinized Apartment 5A. They retrieved one usable fingerprint from the patio doors and a palm print from the window in the children's room. The palm print on the window turned out to be Kate's. The one on the patio door turned out to belong to a GNR first responder. Regardless of how they exited or entered, the potential abductor must have worn gloves or had their prints destroyed by the coming and going. They probably wore gloves. If they, as we seem to agree, they were scouting out the area beforehand, which is preparation. Preparation would include gloves if you're kidnapping a child. Tex also collected 146 hair samples. 129 belonged to McCann's, their party and resort staff. 17 belonged to an unidentified person, either the abductor or a random volunteer from the night of the 3rd. I mean, it's also a hotel room. Many people stay in there all the time, and I'm sure cleaning isn't perfect, unfortunately. I try not to think about it. A stain on the unoccupied bed in the children's room was sent for analysis in case it was semen, but it turned out to be saliva from a child who had stayed in the apartment a week before the McCanns arrived. The Ocean Club had no CCTV cameras. Wow. Times change, don't they? Jesus. Police collected tapes from the only places in Praia da Luz where they existed. Petrol stations. Oh my god, this was 20 years ago, and there's only CCTV cameras in petrol stations in the Algarve. That is mad. Some had already wiped the footage from that night. Others still had the footage archived, but neither Madeleine nor a likely suspect were found on them, and some petrol stations in the area didn't have CCTV cameras at all. That evening, Jerry McCann made another televised appeal for information. On May 6th, a German tourist reported to police that while aboard a boat, he had seen a black bag sitting on a cliff on the coastline. Officers were dispatched. The bag was found to contain nothing but trash. I mean, it's a bit of a stretch, isn't it? It's a black bag in the countryside. Someone's just tipping. I'm not saying don't check it out. I'm just surprised it made it into the script as important. Numerous sightings of little girls resembling Madeleine McCann came flooding into the police from Praia da Luz, elsewhere in the Algarve, from Morocco, and from some as far away as Scandinavia. Within a week of her disappearance, Madeleine sightings were coming in from everywhere on the planet. Reports began to number in their thousands. On May 7th, a PJ investigator told a press conference, quote, "I do not have facts to say whether the child is alive or not." End quote. Now, it should be noted that under Portuguese law, all details of an active investigation must remain secret. To the frustration of the public, PJ spokesman Olegario de Souza told the same press conference, quote, "We are searching for the child, and until the moment she appears, we can say nothing more. We are not magicians." On May 7th, there emerged a procedural absurdity. Jane Tanner had sat down with a police sketch artist to create an image of the man she'd seen carrying the child on the 3rd, but Jane Tanner had not seen the man's face, only his side profile, giving her an impression of his height, hair, skin color, and gait. So for the man's face, the sketch artist produced a blank oval with some long hair on top. It was not meant for publication. But a GNR officer gave a copy to a local shopkeeper while canvassing for witnesses, and the shopkeeper leaked it to the media. Several British and Portuguese newspapers mocked it as an egg with a side parting. This damaged public perception of the competence of the Polizia Judiciaria, particularly in Britain. Oh, that's ridiculous. This is just media. You gotta, do some research, guys. Come on. Please note that it was a sketch of the man's side profile, not the egg with hair, that was later used, among other methods of verification, to confirm this man was a British tourist with his own daughter after the man came forward independently in 2013. 2013, this is like 5-6 years afterwards. Be really surprised if someone was like 5-6 years late. It's like, Simon, do you remember going home with your daughter? She wasn't alive back then, but like, I don't know. Do you remember any moment in that much specificity of your holiday so many years ago? I'd be like, are you having a laugh? I don't remember last week. On the 7th, Kate McCann made an appeal to the media for the first time. They sat in a second-floor apartment in the Ocean Club. Jerry had his arm around his wife, staring stonily down the lens of the camera. Kate McCann said, "We would like to say a few words to the person who has Madeleine or has been with Madeleine. Madeleine is a beautiful, bright, funny, and caring little girl. She is so special. Please do not hurt her. Please do not scare her. Please tell us where to find Madeleine or put her in a place of safety and tell somebody where. We beg you to let Madeleine come home. We need our Madeleine, and Madeleine needs us. Please give our little girl back." Hoo-wee. Grasping at straws. On May 10th, the end of the first week, an intensive search around Praia de Luz had come up empty. There were no major suspects, no significant leads. Chief Investigator Gonzalo Amaral summarized the possible explanations for what happened to Madeleine accordingly. Quote, "Number 1, the child could have woken in bed and, not seeing her parents, left the house in search of them. 2, accidental death and concealment of the body by the parents. 3, physical abuse causing death. 4, aggravated or premeditated murder. 5, an act of vengeance by an abductor. 6, kidnap for ransom. 7, kidnapping by a PDF file. Number 8, kidnapping or killing by a burglar who was surprised by the child." It's number 7, no? Like, a burglar? Like, stealing what? In iPods? And then murdering a child while stealing iPods? You're not robbing a bank. The British law enforcement agencies, cooperating with the Portuguese authorities, broadly agreed with this assessment at the time. There was, however, tension between the British and Portuguese authorities. The British at the time felt that the Portuguese were ill-equipped, possibly incompetent, and not working fast enough. The Portuguese felt they were being condescended to and treated like a, quote, third world country pushed around by a colonial power. All right, Portugal, chill out. You did your own fair bit of colonizing, Portugal. It's like, hey, don't treat us like a colony. Portugal, you are a fucking colonizer, just like Britain. Also on May 10th, the Policia Judiciaria invited Jerry and Kate McCann along with Matt Oldfield and Russ O'Brien to the police station again for a second round of interviews in Portimao. Russ O'Brien went over the timeline of May 3rd and the numerous child checks in exhaustive detail with the police. O'Brien was eager to make sure that nothing, however trivial, was left out. Matt Oldfield's interview was decidedly less congenial. The police leaned on him hard. Oldfield had been the only other person other than Jerry and Kate who had looked in on the McCann children that night. Yeah, in that case, I'll be like, you guys, as much I'm helping, but I'm gonna have to have a lawyer sitting in here with me. The police needed to eliminate him as a suspect. Barring any conclusive forensic evidence, they tried to extract a confession. Over the course of several hours, they accused Matt Oldfield, among other things, of passing Madeleine out of the bedroom window to an accomplice. Guys, you are... This chapter's called Grasping at Straws. Stop wasting your time. Go find the person who actually did this. What's his motivation? Does he have any criminal record? He's fucking friends with them. Jerry and Kate sat outside the interview room and could hear Matt shouting. In total, the McCann party were at the police station for 8 hours. Jerry and Kate sat waiting for their turn, but it never came. They were eventually told they could return to Praia de Luz. The company that owned the Ocean Club, Mark Warner Limited, flew in a crisis counsellor named Alan Pike, who conversed at length with the McCanns. His early notes reveal something that the McCanns would not admit in public. For some reason, they were absolutely convinced that their daughter was already dead. Pike told them that there was no evidence to indicate that yet, and to try and avoid undue speculation. Jerry and Kate claim it was only with the power of prayer that after a few days they began to feel that Madeleine was out there somewhere, alive. I mean, I don't know how to judge like a situation like this, as I've said many times, but I don't think I'd assume they were dead. I'd really be just like, let's go, let's find them. I don't know. You don't know until you're in the situation, do you? You don't understand that amount of stress. Chief Investigator Gonzalo Amaral ordered the tracking down and identification of all known PDF files who either lived in the island. I'm sorry, it's YouTube. We can't say the word, so we have a placeholder word. Otherwise, we get demonetized, and I like making money. Although the chances of this video getting monetized, I'd say are low. It's fairly horrific. who either lived in the Algarve or on holiday there at the time of Madeleine's disappearance. Sex offenders living in the area were located, investigated, and eliminated as suspects from their alibis. Can sex offenders travel if you're like a convicted PDF file? Can you travel? Can you go abroad? Because I feel like, I don't know, depending on how severe that is, that seems like you're just going to be subject to less restrictions because countries' legal systems are not very good at talking to each other. Tourists on sex offender registries took longer to track down since it required liaising with numerous countries exactly. But when that list of suspects was finally exhausted, nobody who fit the profile could be placed anywhere near the Ocean Club at 9 or 10 p.m. on May the 3rd. The Portuguese authorities and their British counterparts were, of course, flooded with tips. One such tip that was not chased up at the time involved scam artists posing as children's charity workers. Okay. Back on the 20th of April, 13 days before Madeleine's disappearance, a British woman was approached by a man about 6'2", 40 to 45 years of age, with a Mediterranean complexion and a drooping moustache. He spoke with a foreign, but not Portuguese accent. The man claimed he was collecting money for a children's orphanage in the nearby village of Espiche. No such orphanage exists. I never do this. Like, I give money to charity, like directly to charities that I like and know about. And I don't feel bad, like, you know, when you go somewhere and you're like, they're like, oh, do you want to add a donation for this charity? And I was like, no, because I don't know this charity. I know nothing about it. I don't know what it is or the people on the street with the things. I'm always just like, no. It's just stupid. And also, these people are fucking horrible people because they ruin the reputation for charities that are actually doing good work. The man claimed they looked after foreign children who lost their parents. On April 28th, Paul Gordon, the British tourist renting apartment 5A at the Ocean Club, was visited by a man who also claimed to be collecting for an orphanage in the countryside. Paul Gordon gave the man €10. According to Gordon, the man did not have a moustache and spoke in perfect English. Then at around 4 or 5 p.m. on May 3rd, the day of Madeleine's disappearance, a British couple living in a villa were approached by two men collecting money for a hostel in Espiche to keep young boys off the street and young girls away from prostitution. If I was in this resort and people were coming up to my door and knocking on it asking for money, who are basically con men, I'd be like, what the fuck, resort? Do your job. I'm not here to be hassled. Again, I thought all resorts just came with gates. Like, they always seem pretty secure, no? They're not just onto the street, but I guess that isn't always the case. The British couple described them as being in their mid-20s. One of them had a Mediterranean complexion, but spoke English well. The other one did not seem to speak it at all. Also around 5 p.m, another British couple who owned a house in Praia de Luge were also approached by two men posing as Espiche charity workers. The one that did the talking wore thick glasses. The witnesses said that he looked about 40. The con artist could have been connected to the disappearance of Madeleine McCann. Yeah, why? It certainly is suspicious that they showed up to apartment 5A on April the 28th. Is it? I just assumed that, that's a ground floor apartment. I'd confusingly called 5A. I'd assume that they were just going through every ground floor apartment and knocking on the door to hustle. And their con seemed to involve children. Well, that's because people like children. Like, you're much more money to give. Oh, what's this for? Oh, we're raising money for a children's orphanage. Whereas we're raising money to save koalas. Like, obviously one is a stronger appeal than the other, unless you've got someone who particularly loves koalas and hates children. On the other hand, con men were a dime a dozen in the Algarve. It was a tourist region, and naturally, their prime targets were foreigners like the British. There was also an epidemic of house and apartment burglaries happening in Praia de Luge around that time. In the first half of 2007 alone, there was a fourfold increase in the number of such burglaries from the previous year. Several of the break-ins happened in the Ocean Club itself, and while none of those burglaries had happened to apartment 5A, its position at the end of the building on the ground floor next to a public street, and it's exactly why people are more likely to come up to it to try and con people out of money, made it particularly vulnerable. Law enforcement could not discount the possibility that Madeleine's disappearance was somehow connected to a robbery gone wrong. Was anything stolen? Oh, this is a stretch, guys, no? There was also a series of nighttime sexual assaults of young girls to consider, mentioned at the beginning of today's episode. Between 2004 and 2006, there have been 4 incidents of a man breaking into British holiday homes and climbing into bed with the girls who were all between the ages of 7 and 10. Go find that fucker. Descriptions of the man, speaking with a foreign accent, wearing a surgical mask, having greasy black hair and tanned skin, along with a distinctive foul smell, connected the incidents. Well, it's the same dude. Go find this guy, track him down, and, get him in prison anyway, and also search his house. A further 8 such nighttime assaults happened between 2007 and 2010. So why aren't there more security cameras? It's not like there's some sort of wildly out-of-touch, inaccessible technology. It's still 2007. At the time of Madeleine's disappearance, the police had no idea who the perpetrator was. A suspect later questioned in the case was a former Ocean Club employee named Euclides Monteiro, who had been fired for theft. Monteiro's mobile phone was also used near the Ocean Club on the night of Madeleine's disappearance. However, Monteiro's DNA did not match the traces found at the various scenes, and he died in a tractor accident in 2009, meaning that he could not have perpetrated the nighttime assaults later in 2009 and 2010. A tractor accident sounds like a horrible way to die. But it is possible that a different man, who was the predator, had something to do with the disappearance of Madeleine McCann, although in none of the nighttime assaults did the perpetrator physically remove the girls from their bedrooms. Yeah, but I mean, escalation is a thing. Well understood. And you don't have a lot else to go on, so go on this. Another tip the police got around this time was from a 12-year-old girl named Tamsin Silence. At 8 a.m. on April the 30th, 2007, she had seen a man looking intently at apartment 5A from across the street. She saw the man again at 12 p.m. on May 2nd. That was the day before Madeleine disappeared. That's a good lead. This time, the man was standing in the pool area, once again staring at apartment 5A. Tamsin Silence's description of the man matched the one given by an upstairs neighbor who saw someone slip out of the back of the apartment building, possibly from 5A, and furtively close the iron gate on May 3rd. He was light-skinned, fair-haired, about 30 to 40, and about 5'10" to 5'11". Tamsin Silence remembers the man was, quote, ugly and disgusting, with small pimples on his face. He's an ugly, disgusting man. You'd recognize him. These sightings point strongly toward the theory of an abductor scouting out the apartment before striking. Yeah, and the no fingerprints and everything, this was pre-planned, in my opinion. Please note, however, that the upstairs neighbor did not directly see the man coming out of 5A, but rather from its general direction, and there are many reasons why a man might idly stare at a building while passing the time at a summer resort. Yeah, I mean, you're on holiday. He doesn't just be like, sit in the chair. What are you looking at? Oh, just nothing. I'm just like not working. Just staring. What are you just staring? A 12-year-old Tamsin may have only decided that the man was staring at 5A in particular after she heard of the high-profile disappearance of Madeleine McCann. Nevertheless, the reports of someone watching the McCann's apartment were significant. The difficulty was finding a man who fit that description and accruing enough evidence to tie him to the abduction. As tenuous as these connections were, at the very least, one could draw the broad conclusion that, far from being a safe environment, there were plenty of potential creeps lurking around Praia de Luz and the Ocean Club in May 2007, and one of them could have snatched Madeleine from her bed. Meet Robert Murat. Oh wait, was he the translator? Oh, he is. Wait, and normally when David says meet XYZ, that's normally when he introduces the culprit. But this was just the random translator dude. I mean, maybe I just thought he was nice. And oh no, let's see. Before we throw too much accusations his way, maybe it's just like, no, and it turns out he was really helpful. Back on the 4th of May, Robert Murat approached Kate McCann and Russ O'Brien in the parking lot of the Ocean Club while they were waiting for the PJ to arrive. Murat volunteered to act as a translator between them and the Portuguese authorities. Kate McCann thanked him, and Russ O'Brien put Murat's number in his phone. Robert Murat was 33 years old, the son of a Portuguese father and an English mother. He'd grown up in Praia de Luz and had worked in both Portugal and the UK as a property consultant. He had recently separated from his British wife, who resided in the UK with their 4-year-old daughter. At the time of Madeleine's disappearance, Murat lived with his mother in a house 150 yards or 137 meters down the street from apartment 5A. Nothing weird so far. After the McCanns departed for Portimao to give their first official statements, Robert Murat approached officers of the GNR, offering to help translate as they questioned British witnesses. The police began taking Murat with them as they talked to hotel guests, listing his name as a translator in their reports. It's a very good way to slip into an investigation and get privy to all sorts of information that you shouldn't be privy to. As the day wore on, Murat continued to linger outside the Ocean Club, often being the first one to approach British journalists as they arrived. Dude, you got nothing better to do? You're 33 years old, don't you have a job? At one point during the afternoon, Murat gave his opinion to a reporter from the Daily Telegraph that Madeleine, quote, had been taken by someone from outside the area, and she was no longer in Portugal and may never be found. Dude, that is dark, and why do we need to listen to you? And you're probably right. Almost at once, Robert Murat became the man on the spot, at the center of a flow of information. He also began asking questions of the police and various journalists about the details of the disappearance, ostensibly in case he could relay the information to others during his many conversations. Murat continued to volunteer as a translator over the next few days. By May 6th, however, several of the British journalists in Praia da Luz started to get suspicious of him. As a reporter from the Sunday Mirror put it, he was just too close to the investigation. He spent too much time talking to the media. Many of the journalists had in the back of their minds the Soham murders of 2 girls in 2002. The school caretaker, Ian Huntley, Jesus Christ, that was a dark one, was one of the last witnesses to see them alive. He dove into volunteering and talking to the media. He also asked too many questions. It turned out that he was the killer. And now here was Robert Murat, selflessly volunteering in a similar way. I mean, don't jump to conclusions too hard, because otherwise people will be like, all right, I'm not going to volunteer. It just makes me suspicious. But yeah. Journalist Laurie Campbell asked Murat several questions about the nature of his involvement. He gave a vague reply that he was just a local doing what he could to help out and that he had a daughter Madeleine's age. During the interview, a photographer started taking pictures of Murat. He got annoyed, asked why he was being photographed, and politely told the man to stop. This inflamed Laurie Campbell's suspicions. She contacted the Policia Judiciaria and told them her misgivings about Murat. Several other journalists also phoned in tips about Murat on that same day. And I have to say, if you're getting a tip from a journalist, police, rather than just a regular member of the public, journalists are going to be way more turned on to suspicious behavior than your average Joe, right? It's their job to dig into shit. And I would take there's something up with that guy, way more seriously than I would from just a random bloke. Or bloquette. 2 days later, on May the 8th, a woman speaking fluent Portuguese phoned in an anonymous tip making a string of unsubstantiated allegations about Mr. Murat being a PDF file, among other things. Meanwhile, Murat had no criminal record, was known and respected in the area, and had told police he spent the night of Madeleine's disappearance at home with his mother. But Murat had a slightly odd manner about him, and it did him no favors. Conversing with people, he was highly repressed, guarded, and emotionless. He was tall, with a significant amount of bulk in his upper body, with what one commenter described as a rather Frankenstein-like face. Okay. Murat was blind in one eye, and one journalist harshly described it as lifeless and wonky. Their words, not mine, giving him an asymmetrical appearance. All right, guys, just let up on the poor guy's face. The fact that Murat was the 33-year-old man living with his mother and that he was separated from a daughter around Madeleine's age began to form a sinister narrative in people's minds. All this was extremely petty and specious, but as the days wore on without any breakthroughs in the case, and with the odds of finding Madeleine alive rapidly shrinking, police began grasping at straws, and muckraking is just what journalists do. In the days following May 6th, the gossip about Robert Murat filtered its way from the journalists through the locals and tourists, and eventually reached the ears of the McCann party. On May 12th, it was Madeleine McCann's 4th birthday. Jerry and Kate spent the entire day away from the media, sequestered in a villa provided by the Ocean Club. In the evening, the McCanns and their friends threw a party, with staff bringing over bottles of wine and beer. Oh, because it's her birthday. Jerry rose to give a toast to his daughter, but he said he was too upset to finish it. The Ocean Club had also provided the McCanns with a PR consultant, Alex Wolfel, who had read a statement to the media. Quote, "Today is our daughter Madeleine's 4th birthday. We would like to mark today by asking people to redouble their efforts to help find Madeleine. Please keep looking. Please keep praying. Please bring Madeleine home." The next day, May 13th, Jane Tanner identified Robert Murat as the man she'd seen carrying an unconscious young girl down the Rua Gentil Martins from apartment 5A. It just so happened that at the end of the street was Murat's house. We now know that the man Tanner saw wasn't Murat. Okay, yeah, eyewitness testimony, notoriously bad. But on the evening after Tanner identified him, Robert Murat was driving a rented car in Lagos when he noticed that he was being tailed by another vehicle. Murat shook the tail and drove to the PJ office in Portimao. No one was there. Murat rang Gonzalo Amaral and asked if his men were following him. Amaral told Murat that it was probably just journalists. Murat drove out, noticed the car that had been tailing him earlier and chased it. He got the car's registration. Murat rang Amaral again, who denied the car was driven by the PJ. In reality, Amaral had ordered round-the-clock surveillance of Robert Murat, tapped his phones, and then used a thermal camera to determine if there was anyone else in his home other than just him and his mother. Amaral invited Murat to have a drink in Lagos. Murat drank coffee. He later said that he thought the cops were hoping to get him drunk. Okay, there's some good police in there. They're just quietly keeping an eye on him without tipping their hands. I think that's very good. At 7 a.m. on May 14th, Robert Murat got a phone call from the Policia Judiciaria saying that they had a breakthrough in the case and needed him to translate some documents. Murat exited the gate of his house, and that is when the PJ raided the place. They tossed the house and began preliminary excavations in the yard. Meanwhile, Murat was carted down to the police station in Portimao. He was held for questioning for approximately 19 hours. Murat claims that he was given neither food nor water. Police leaned on him hard, hoping to extract confession. He was released in the early hours of May 15th. He had not been charged, but he was declared arguido by the police, which in Portuguese essentially means that Murat was now a formal suspect. The media inevitably descended like locusts, and Rob Murat's photograph was transmitted all over the world. Some publications began running a series of scurrilous and unfounded articles that implied or outright stated that Murat was a PDF file, a human trafficker, or a pornographer. I hope, if he isn't any of these things, he's going to have some big-ass lawsuits after this one. They circulated fake reports of decisive evidence found in Murat's home. They gave a very slanted view of the breakdown of his marriage and painted his being deprived of his daughter as a motive. Dudes, what are you doing, press? You're just making stuff up. Meanwhile, in the UK, Murat's soon-to-be ex-wife told the media that he was completely innocent and he was, quote, so sweet and good-natured. He was just trying to help. Murat's girlfriend, prior to lose, a German national named Michaela Walzach, was dragged in for questioning. She was grilled over her involvement and contact with Murat in the days surrounding Madeleine's disappearance. The police searched her home. She was also slandered in the press. I really hope there's some lawsuits, assuming this all turns out to be nothing, which I get the feeling it is going to turn out to be. Murat had also recently hired a 22-year-old Russian expat named Sergei Malinka to create a website for him. Phone records indicate that at 11:30 p.m. on the night of Madeleine's appearance, Murat made a phone call to Malinka. The 22-year-old did not answer the call, and Robert Murat said he had no recollection of making it. He did not deny making it and speculated that maybe it was a pocket dial. To this day, we don't know why Murat made the call. But on either side of it, Murat made several calls to his girlfriend, so he may have accidentally selected Malinka from the menu. Yeah, I mean, I really thought pocket dials were a thing of the past, and then the other day, somehow I just look at my phone and it's calling someone. And I'm like, whoa, stop. And then they call me back and they're like, dude, what's up? We haven't spoken in like a very long time. Is something wrong? And I'm like, no, dude, I just pocket dials. Beer sometime? But I didn't think that happens anymore, but it just happened to me the other day. On May 16th, police found Sergei Malinka and bundled him into the back of the car. All right. I'm not sure what he's got to do with it. They drove him aimlessly around Lagos for 2 hours. Malinka soon learned the cops were waiting for a judge to grant them a search warrant for his apartment. When the warrant came through, the cops raided the place, confiscating several computers, many of which Malinka was repairing for clients. They also confiscated 27 CD-ROMs. Meanwhile, Sergei Malinka was taken to Portimao and interrogated for several hours. The police said he was guilty and called him a PDF file, a predator, Russian mafia, and a human trafficker. Malinka was not able to tell the police much about Murat, claiming he did not know the man beyond creating a website for him. What evidence do the police have that this guy is any of these things? What evidence did they have to possibly get a search warrant for his apartment? He's a suspect's web designer. What? Near the end of the interrogation, Gonzalo Amaro came into the room and told Malinka to stand up. Malinka complied. Amaro kicked Malinka's chair across the room and demanded to know why Murat had called him at 11:30 p.m. on May the 3rd. He didn't answer. The call was not answered. What was... Why did he call you? I don't fucking know, dude. It was 11:30 at night. Why the fuck would I answer the phone from one of my clients at 11:30 at night? You know I didn't answer it. How the fuck would I know what it's about? Why are you searching my house? Again, Malinka couldn't provide much information because he didn't answer the call. Obviously. Since 2007, a narrative has sprung up around all of these aggressive interrogations conducted by the police that were a sign of just how backward and corrupt the Portuguese police force was, or that they were desperately trying to pin the crime on a suspect so the Algarve tourist industry didn't lose that much money. But to put things in context, on May 16th, Madeleine McCann had been missing for 13 days. Every hour that passed reduced the chances that she'd be found alive. The circumstances did not afford the luxury of carefully building a case against a laundry list of suspects. No, but you can't just rush into it. I don't understand how it's possible to get a search warrant for this guy's house for him being the web designer of a potential suspect. That seems insane and not right. So, the Policia Judiciaria played one of the only cards they had left, playing bad cop in a high-pressure interrogation. If the tactic revealed something vital, or elicited a confession, or merely ruled out a suspect, it was arguably worth it while the clock was still ticking. And it was also worth noting that the tactic of a hostile interrogation, accusations and raised voices, not thumbscrews and car batteries attached to people's genitals, is used in similar circumstances by police forces in the United Kingdom, North America, and many other places in the Western world. One may find the tactic objectionable, but it is by no means an exclusively Portuguese tactic. Sergei Malinka was released from questioning that evening without being declared arguido. As for the computers the police confiscated from Malinka's apartment, they found many of the hard drives had been erased. Again, some of these hard drives were from Malinka's clients, not his personal possessions, but among the computers and CD-ROMs, police alleged they found illicit pornography, most likely what YouTube obliges us to call CP. Alright, okay, well there's some... But they're just alleging this. Did they pursue a case? Was there anything other than they're just like, yeah, maybe it did? Again, guys, like, serious accusations, serious evidence. Sergei Malinka had no idea which device police found such content on, and the police have not specified. Malinka has said, quote, "Show me one computer in the world that did not have a cookie or something from a porn site." Yeah, of course. But that's not what we're talking about here. It should be noted that Malinka has never been charged with possession of CP or anything like that. Yeah, just to be 100% clear, the police would have prosecuted this if there was something there. I really don't think there was. This just seems crazy. Amid all the furor over Robert Murat, Jerry McCann said to the media, "In general terms, in terms of suspects, I would say as a family, and I hope that everyone else here treats all suspects the way we would hope to be treated, and that they are presumed innocent until someone is charged, arrested, and convicted of any criminal offense. Jerry, you have your head screwed on incredibly well for someone in that situation." Behind the scenes, however, some of the McCann party were less than charitable. Jane Tanner, Russ O'Brien, and Rachel Oldfield claimed that they saw Murat at the Ocean Club and near apartment 5A on the night of Madeleine's disappearance. However, several local witnesses who knew Murat were at the Ocean Club that night and did not see him there. Eyewitness testimony is notoriously bad. Didn't someone already identify him incorrectly? The McCann party would later climb down from their allegations and admit that their recollection of seeing Murat was unreliable. Robert Murat remained arguido for a long time. In July 2007, police raided his house again, this time tearing up flower beds, chopping down trees, and using underground radar. The public infamy also ruined Murat's property business. By October, Murat told the BBC, "It's been 5 months. My savings have gone. Mum's doing what she can, and it's just very, very difficult." His arguido status remained in force for another year, until July 2008. Meanwhile, Sergei Malinka's car was firebombed in front of his apartment with the word "Fala," or talk, scrawled in red paint on the sidewalk beside it. Dude, this is crazy. These people, there's not... Especially the Sergei guy, he's done nothing! After Murat's arguido status was lifted, he sued 11 British newspapers, excellent, and Sky News over false information they'd reported about him. He got a series of public apologies and over £600,000 in damages, excellent. Sergei Malinka and Murat's girlfriend, Michaela Walstrus, also sued and received public apologies and roughly £200,000 apiece. Good. Good. Keep them in line. This is a good response. Unthinkable. In Kate McCann's first statement to the police on May 4th, she said that after entering the children's bedroom at 10 p.m. the night before, she was alarmed to see the window was open. The McCanns claimed that they always kept the window shut. Before police arrived, Jerry allegedly closed the window, lowered the shutters, testing it as a possible point of entry from the outside. The next morning, when forensic technicians dusted for prints, they found a palm print belonging to Kate McCann on the inside of the glass, tilted at an angle that suggested she was pushing the window open, not pulling it shut. Okay, hold on. I would just assume that she's putting her hand in there, and then it's like, okay, so she locks it, and I would 100% do this, so I'm also a little bit neurotic, is I'd lock it, and then I'd put my hand on the glass and try to push it up as if I was trying to open it, just to make sure that it is locked and it is inaccessible. It wouldn't open, but my palm print would still be on there, making an opening motion. There would be no reason for Kate McCann to open the window that evening, and it runs contrary to her story. Perhaps Kate touched the window on an earlier day, but the McCanns testified that they always left that window shut, and Kate's statement does not mention her opening it. I don't think she did open it. She just tried to test it. Gonzalo Amaro later commented, quote, "That's when we started thinking about the parents as suspect, because that's a staging of a crime." Really? I mean, no, I really don't think so. I really don't think so. Nevertheless, for the next 7 days, police focused on the ground search, interviewing hundreds of witnesses, following up on registered sex offenders in the area, and combing through a mountain of tips that would soon number in the thousands. The following week was focused on Robert Murat, whom the McCann party themselves had implicated. But in the backs of their mind, the Portuguese authorities suspected that the McCanns could have been responsible for their daughter's disappearance. After all, depending on what source you use for statistics, only about 1 to 5% of child abductions are perpetrated by a stranger. The rest are abductions done by parents, relatives, or individuals who are otherwise close to the child. I mean, yes, of course, because it's like the dad who doesn't have custody but wants to see his kids, which is, I mean, it's not harmless, but of course, the vast majority are going to be made up of that much, much lesser harmful situation. It was inevitable at some point police scrutiny would fall upon Kate and Jerry McCann, if only to clear them. On May 14th, the same day that Robert Murat was declared arguido, Jerry McCann told the press that they felt Madeleine was alive somewhere and declared that they would stay in Portugal until she'd been found. In Scotland, Jerry's sister, Philomena, got one of her students to set up a website, findmadeleine.com, which got 60 million hits in the first 48 hours. God damn, that's a lot. Then her website must have been run on a very powerful server to suddenly handle 60 million hits. Eventually, 6 students would manage the website, passing on tips to police and mailing orders of Find Madeleine merchandise, wristbands, posters, badges, etc. to customers. Jerry McCann started a daily blog, which got 1 billion hits within 3 months. Within a few weeks of Madeleine's disappearance, the McCanns had accrued a fund of £1.85 million. Among the donors were Richard Branson, Philip Green, J.K. Rowling, Wayne Rooney, Simon Cowell, and Rupert Murdoch. It supported ongoing search efforts. There was a separate £2.5 million reward for information. Later, there were some questions posed about how some of the money was used, how much went to actual searches, and how much went towards photo ops, PR staff, and travel. In October, the BBC reported that the fund was used for 2 mortgage payments on the McCann's home. Again, this is fine. What do you want to do? They're not working. They're not earning any money. They're out trying to save their daughter. What do you want? Of course it's fine that they can use these payments to pay their mortgage. It's so they don't have to go back to their jobs while their daughter's missing. This is completely reasonable. So I say that, well, they were renting Ferraris. No, that's not what was happening. At Find Madeleine rallies, Don't You Forget About Me by The Simple Minds became her theme song. It would later become the anthem for missing children's rallies internationally. Singer-songwriter Bryan Adams also dedicated a concert to Madeleine, and across the world, there were numerous charity drives to get more money for the Find Madeleine Fund. One man rode a bike for 2 days from Northern Ireland to the village of Rothley via ferry to raise money. Children wearing yellow ribbons and carrying pictures of Madeleine were instructed by their teachers to raise money in their neighbourhoods. Numerous footballers, including Cristiano Ronaldo and David Beckham, made public appeals for information. Jerry was taking calls from politicians, including soon-to-be Prime Minister Gordon Brown. Oh my God, back in the day. Kate got a call from Sherry Blair, wife of outgoing PM Tony Blair. The McCanns now had a direct line to Britain's elite, which would be ongoing. The McCanns also brought on another PR supervisor, Justin McGuinness, who was headhunted from London for the job. She would soon arrange numerous photo appearances, tours, and discussions with the media. To quote McGuinness, we treated it as a political campaign. Within 2 weeks of Madeleine's disappearance, Portuguese investigators could no longer go out in public without being mobbed by reporters. This impeded their movements, quite literally, and their ability to work, eating up their time being asked for comments while the clock was still ticking. The investigators were also facing internal police pressure and political pressure from the government. In turn, the Portuguese government found themselves under pressure from the British. Carlos Anjos, union president of the Polícia Judiciária, said, quote, "It was never just a case of a criminal investigation. I don't remember any other case where the diplomats of one country brought such pressure on the authorities of another country." As such, Portugal spent approximately 800 times more money on the Madeleine McCann case than they did on the average missing child case from Portugal itself. It was a race against time to follow up on all the tips, even the ones that came from psychics or mediums, really? Or those that simply sounded like bullshit. You just didn't know. Oh, no, psychics and mediums, you do know, it's nonsense. There was always an enormous amount of pressure from all quarters to find answers about what had happened to Madeleine and to find them fast. On May 22nd, Jerry McCann said in a prepared statement to the media, "We will travel wherever is necessary to ensure people across Europe recognize Madeleine's picture. All we're doing is starting to spread the net far and wide." On the 23rd of May, the McCanns travelled to a photo opportunity at the Shrine of Fatima, north of Lisbon. There, amid crowds held back by security and journalists, curated according to their credentials, the McCanns were photographed lighting candles, praying and attending Mass. An official press liaison on loan from the British government arrived. His name was Clarence Mitchell, a former BBC journalist, now working at the Cabinet Office. Also on the 23rd, Jerry McCann took another couple of phone calls with soon-to-be PM Gordon Brown and Foreign Secretary Margaret Beckett. Briefly returning to Praia de Luz, the McCanns rented a car, a silver Renault, to move around the local area with greater ease. They didn't stay long. On May the 27th, Sir Philip Green provided the McCanns with a private jet to take them to the Vatican. They spent the night at the British ambassador's residence in Rome. The next day, May 28th, the highly devout McCanns met the Pope. Benedict XVI, Joseph Ratzinger, held their hands and blessed a picture of Madeleine. Kate said, "I truly believed that would make a difference for Madeleine. It's the closest you can get to meeting God in some way. And I just thought all my prayers, etc., would be channeled more quickly to God." From Rome, the McCanns departed on a 13-day international tour, taking them from Rome to Madrid to multiple locations in Germany and Netherlands. They then returned to Portugal for a brief rest. Then they visited the Rabat in Morocco for a photo op with some children bearing copies of Madeleine's photograph. Again, the McCanns were provided with a private jet to, quote, minimize time away from the twins. The McCanns reportedly also had a helicopter available to them. Are we supposed to judge them for this? I feel like the press would pick up on this and be like, oh, look at this, they're just jetting around in a private jet. Well, it's like, yeah, what's the problem? I don't see what the problem with this is. They're not environmental activists. They're not spending money that's been donated. It's like a billionaire let them use his jet. What are you supposed to do? Say no and just get hassled on regular flights? Come on now, it's fine. It wasn't long, however, before the extent of the travel, the slick staged managed photo ops, and the perceived focus on Jerry and Kate McCann began to strike the wrong chord with the public. The tour began to be called The Roadshow in the media. Jerry McCann was often at pains to justify the travel. In Amsterdam, he said, quote, "It's not a tour, we're having a series of brief visits." On June the 3rd, Sunday Times columnist India Knight wrote, "There is clearly a growing rumble of unease out there at the McCanns' omnipresence in the papers and on television. What do you want them to do? Just shut the fuck up and go away?" I don't think they give a shit. I would not give a shit. I'd be like, okay, too bad. I don't give a shit what you think of me as long as you see my daughter's face. That's all I care about. I don't give a shit what you think of me. In The Guardian, Simon Jenkins observed that a mass media campaign might have been a good way to get witnesses to come forward in the immediate aftermath of the kidnapping, but it was less and less helpful to Madeleine now. Yeah, but what's the harm? Jenkins also pointed out that an excessive publicity might actually endanger Madeleine's life, since she'd become too recognizable to transport. Bro, we already crossed that path a long time ago, Jenkins. Within a month of Madeleine's disappearance, there was a shift in public sentiment. Some people were becoming increasingly uncomfortable with how the focus was often on Jerry and Kate McCann, as celebrities meeting dignitaries and putting on symbolic photo ops, and less on Madeleine and the investigation. Narratives began to be spun that the McCanns had fallen headfirst into international fame and were now reveling in it, when their focus should have been on their daughter. This just sounds kind of insane to me. The couple were also reluctant to cry in public. I mean, chill the fuck out. What? This just seems incredibly unreasonable. Reportedly, someone had told Kate to avoid public displays of grief in case her distress caused excitement in Madeleine's abductor. The lack of tears was compounded by television footage of McCann's photo ops occasionally smiling from ear to ear. As PR advisor Justin McGuinness later put it, you could tell there was a certain level of hostility. I think this is just completely outrageous. I think this is completely unjustified. I think it's callous. I don't like it at all. On June 7th, the McCanns were in Berlin, where they gave another press conference. Radio journalist Sabine Mueller asked, "How do you deal with the fact that more and more people seem to be pointing a finger at you, saying that the way you behave is not the way people would normally behave if their child is abducted? And they seem to be implying that you might have something to do with it." I'd be like, well, they can fuck off. You don't know how you'll react when your child is abducted. You just don't, and you don't know what you'll do, and you don't know the lengths you'll go to get them back. Understandably, the McCanns looked uncomfortable at the question. It was the first time they'd been directly asked such a thing by a reporter in public. After a pause, Kate McCann replied, "To be honest, I don't think that actually is the case. I think there's a very small minority of people that are criticizing us. You know, the facts are out there. We were dining very close to the children, and we were checking on them very, very regularly. You know, we were very responsible parents, and we love our children so much. I think it's only a very few people who are actually criticizing us." Jerry then added, "I have never heard before that anyone considers us suspects in this. The Portuguese police certainly don't. And without going into too much detail about the circumstances, we were the large group of people. And, you know, there's absolutely no way Kate and I are involved in this abduction." I'd be tempted to. I'd be like, "I find your question offensive. How dare you?" I think I'd just walk out of that interview, to be honest. If someone asked me that, I'd be like, no, I'm leaving. Yeah, I would leave. I'm almost certain I would just leave. I do not think that's an appropriate question. The Pact of Silence. On June the 7th, Chief Inspector Gonçalo Amaral and PJ spokesman Oleguero de Souza, along with several other officers, were photographed at lunch. They claim most of the discussion was brainstorming about the case. A bottle of wine and a bottle of Johnny Walker were photographed on the table. Amaral says he had beer. The newspaper said the men were there from 1:30 to 4:30 p.m. The press used this to smear the Portuguese police as doing nothing to find Madeleine while enjoying boozy lunches. Amaral was a particular target for the newspapers. His appearance at the time did him no favours, being a stereotypical aging cop with a roughly hewn moustache, balding head and a beer gut. The press called him fat, lazy, sleazy, and a drunk. They claimed Amaral only worked 4 hours a day. The records in the case files indicate something different. For weeks, Amaral and his staff were putting in long hours, often without weekends or paid leave. Yeah, I mean, don't judge things too much by their appearances, guys. And these guys have been working for weeks, and I'm sure it's very intense. Like, I'm sorry, if they want to have a beer with their lunch, or a bottle of wine, or like a shot of whiskey, fine. Like, even people in crazy situations, they need a break. In reality, Amaral was a highly respected investigator in Portugal, even in most of the media, having graduated at the top of his class and training under the current national head of the Polícia Judiciária. One Portuguese journalist described Amaral as having, quote, a bulletproof reputation. But the lunch seemed to confirm the ongoing narrative in the British press that the Portuguese were incompetent, corrupt, and doing little or nothing to find Madeleine McCann. Yeah, it seems like the British press are riling up a whole lot of bullshit that is just not true. On June the 9th, a spokesperson for McCann's declared that Jerry and Kate would stay in Portugal until the end of the summer because, quote, this is the place where mentally they make a connection. As far as they're concerned, this is where Madeleine still is. Meanwhile, press liaison Clarence Mitchell, on loan from the British Cabinet Office, was summoned home. The government had grown anxious about Mitchell's direct involvement. The reason they gave was that the story had apparently become about Mitchell rather than Madeleine. There's very little indication from newspaper articles at the time that this was even remotely true. Sounds like an excuse just to bring him home for some reason. Next to nothing was written about Mitchell. There was, however, quite a bit casting doubt on the McCanns. On June 22nd, Jerry and Kate appeared before a large crowd gathered by the seaside in Praia da Luz. It had been 50 days since Madeleine's disappearance. The McCanns released 50 yellow balloons into the air, each with Madeleine's picture on them. The balloons floated over the ocean and out of sight. Then the McCanns did a meet and greet with the locals who had supported them. Balloons were released all over the world. In California, a group of people released 50 white doves. In Afghanistan, occupying troops released 50 kites with Madeleine's picture on them. Back in Praia da Luz, Jerry announced that the next phase of the campaign to find Madeleine would be, quote, event-based. He was firmly behind the idea of more photo ops to keep his daughter's picture in the news. More events, more celebrity meetings, and more symbolic gestures like 50 balloons would be in store. Afterward, Jerry flew to London to meet with Jim Gamble of the British Child Exploitation and Online Protection Command, or CEOP. The Leicestershire Police had requested the meeting with Gamble on Jerry McCann's behalf. Gamble replied that he'd be happy to meet Jerry, but wanted reassurance that he was not a suspect. The Leicestershire Police said that he was, quote, absolutely not a suspect. Jim Gamble said the following about the encounter. I have to say the first time I met Jerry McCann in person, I think it's harsh to say, but I didn't really like him. It wasn't a warm engagement. I've met many survivors of abuse and their families, and there's a feeling of empathy. There is a feeling of warmth, but Jerry was very cold and very controlled. After their meeting, Gamble began to suspect Jerry of having something to do with Madeleine's disappearance. Based on what, Jimbo? About his own icy interactions with him, Gonçalo Amaral said, quote, Gary seems like a very controlling person. He's someone that knows how to dominate others very well and maintain his composure. He's a surgeon, so it's not easy to catch him off balance. Okay, fine. I'm not going to defend his personality. He sounds like he could be a bit of a douche, but that doesn't mean he's got something to do with his daughter's disappearance, where there's fucking no evidence to suggest that. He's like, he's a bit of a douche. So... Then, on the 30th of June, the Portuguese newspaper Sol published an article called The Pact of Silence by Felicia Cabrita and Margarida Davin. Felicia Cabrita was famous throughout Portugal for her 2002 expose on the Casa Pia PDF file ring. Casa Pia was an orphanage that since the 1960s had taken money from millionaires to fly in and do whatever they liked to children under their care. Jesus Christ. Cabrita, where was this in Portugal? In 2002? Oh, in the 1960s. Blown open in 2002. Okay. Cabrita started looking into the Madeleine McCann story about 3 weeks after her disappearance. Quote, "I found it very strange. The police in Portugal, in regard to this case, were not focusing on the family, but only on the actual kidnapping. And we know that in most cases, the culprit is someone who is close to the child." Cabrita went to the tapas restaurant at the Ocean Club and sat at the same table the McCann party had used during their stay. Jerry had several times described the view of the apartment of 5A from the table using the following lines. "You've seen the proximity of the restaurant. There was a line of sight to the apartment. It was not dissimilar to having dinner in your garden." But Cabrita was astonished to discover that you could barely make out the apartment at all. Ignoring the fact that he had to look through thick plastic rain sheets, there was a wall and a high hedge in the way, obscuring the patio doors and the pathway behind the building. You couldn't see anyone coming and going. Yeah, okay. I mean, I said, I'm not particularly comfortable with the fact that they just left their kids in the room while they went to dinner, and I don't know if things were different back then, but it seems people are also doubting that. But that doesn't mean that the parents kidnapped her. It just means maybe, if anything, they were a bit negligent. And personally, I struggle with that. The Pact of Silence article was 3,000 words long. Cabrita interviewed a member of staff who only saw one person, Russ O'Brien, get up from the table all evening prior to Kate McCann returning to apartment 5A. The article claims that night, the resort's aerobics instructor hosted a quiz for the restaurant patrons. When the quiz was over at 9:30 p.m., the article claims that Jerry invited her to sit down at their table and that no one got up at this time, despite the McCann party claiming 2 people did. Cabrita later said, "The parents' version, in terms of timing, don't match. Their version is chaotic and it doesn't match with the employees' version, who were working and served them in the hotel. If they kept the time they said they were at dinner and were leaving to see the kids, we would be in an opera by Stravinsky. One would sit, the other would leave. It would have been ridiculous." The McCann party provided multiple versions of the events that night. In the first version, given on May 4th, Jerry claims that when he went to check in on the children around 9 p.m., he entered the apartment by walking around to the front of the building through the entrance hall and used his key on the locked front door. In later versions, Jerry said he went in through the unlocked patio doors around the back, a significant difference that was hard to attribute solely to a lapse of memory. Also, in the first version, Kate said that returning to the room at 10 p.m., she looked for Madeleine under the bed but, quote, couldn't see her there. Except it wouldn't have just been a matter of not seeing her. The mattress was only an inch or 2 above the floor. Impossible for even a child to fit under. It might imply that Kate hadn't bothered to look under the bed at all because she didn't need to. Then roughly 24 hours, these are very minor discrepancies. I have to say, I am biased here. I feel biased towards the parents because, I don't know, I see myself in them, in these two, middle-class British people, young kids my age, resort on holiday. And I don't know. I guess I just have a bias or an empathy towards that. Then roughly 24 hours after giving the first version, the McCann party got together and composed a revised version. The timings originally differed by 5 minutes or so, and Matt Oldfield going to check on the children at 9:30 was briefly omitted for some reason, perhaps by mistake. Only Russ O'Brien is noted to have gotten up from the table at that time. Shortly after, a final version was typed up and included Matt Oldfield's 9:30 check-in on apartment 5A, plus a lot more detail about each check and a description of Madeleine and the man Jane Turner had seen at 9:15. This is the version that most people use today. Chief Investigator Gonzalo Amaral later asserted that, quoting here, "What is emphasized is that there was a security system where everybody was looking after everybody else, but that's not quite how it happened. As is normal on holiday, people are very relaxed. They drank a lot of alcohol, and sometimes they would walk home to pee." An upstairs neighbor, Pamela Fenn, told police that on one of the nights prior to the disappearance, she heard prolonged crying coming from apartment 5A, implying the checks were not frequent, if her statement is true. It may also be related to Madeleine's question on the morning of May 3rd, asking her mother why they didn't come when Sean and her were crying. Yeah, I'm pretty inclined to believe that they weren't checking on their kids as much as they said they were. Which is what it is, The Pact of Silence article got its name from 2 statements to Cabrita and Davin by Russ O'Brien and David Payne. O'Brien cut off his interview saying, quote, "I have nothing further to tell you. I am not going to dishonor the promise I made with Kate and Jerry. They want to control all information that is disclosed." And David Payne said, "We have a pact. This is our matter only. It is nobody else's business." Cabrita and Davin also claim in the article that Jerry McCann contacted them and threatened to report them to the police for interfering with an investigation. The article does not go into specific allegations about the role of the McCann party in Madeleine's disappearance. It does, however, highlight how the McCann party was all too eager to point the finger at Robert Murat. At the time of the article's publication, Jane Tanner was still insisting that Murat was the man she'd seen carrying the child that night, and a total of 3 members from the McCann party were adamant they'd seen Murat at the Ocean Club earlier that evening. Cabrita later said, quote, "There are questions in the air. Why leave the children alone? Why did they not use the babysitting service the hotel provided? They didn't use it. You see a man who emotionally supports someone, Robert Murat volunteering, and suddenly he is transformed into a suspect." In Cabrita's estimation, Murat was being used as a patsy. As for the so-called Pact of Silence, Gonzalo Amara has said, quote, "The act of abandoning the children, leaving them alone for a long time, was not unique to the missing child's parents. Every one of their friends had done it, so there seems to have been an alliance between them to protect someone. Protect someone or just protect their reputations. Because you don't want to be the parents who their kid got missing because you weren't checking on them enough and you left them in the hotel room. And if everyone else was doing it, it's just going to look just as bad for you, and your names are going to be all over the press. So you're just minimizing damage, which is smart. The hypothesis that was slowly emerging around the time of the article's publication was that the McCann party, with a total of 8 young children and 6 of the adults being doctors, had dumped their kids in daycare all day long and then sedated the children so they could stay out late drinking without worrying about the night crash closing at 11:30 p.m. Then, according to the hypothesis, Madeleine had a bad reaction to the drugs or was given an accidental overdose and died somewhere between 5:35 and 8:30 that evening, with someone disposing of her body. Based on what? Based on what? And so, the hypothesis went, the McCann party were all sworn to secrecy because they were also dating their children, which would have destroyed their reputations, possibly endangered their medical licenses, and may have resulted in child welfare officers taking away their kids, and even resulted in a criminal prosecution for the McCanns and any third parties identified as accessories, allegedly. I feel like I don't even need to say allegedly there. This is put forward by a journalist who is wildly speculating. It was unthinkable. It was monstrous. And if wrong, it was a terrible thing to accuse 2 parents of doing. But it wasn't just Amaral and Cabrita who were thinking that way at the time. Many Portuguese investigators and some of their British counterparts were starting to draw similar conclusions. But could they prove it? Pursue this, absolutely. Especially after a bunch of time has gone by. And it's like, we haven't found her. And we should, move from searching to investigating. And I think the parents should absolutely be a part of that investigation. Release the hounds. On July 3rd, the McCanns gave a press conference at which an extra effort was made to invite the Portuguese media. This was widely viewed as a conciliatory move after the publication of the bombshell Pact of Silence article a few days prior. Although the mood of the press was turning sour all over the world, the Portuguese media had been particularly skeptical of the McCanns in the past few weeks. One cultural stumbling block was the Portuguese could not understand why anybody would leave their kids alone for the evening, or why parents would not weep in public, whereas in Britain, both of these things were not unheard of. Yeah, I think, stiff upper lip, I wouldn't want to cry in public in a situation like this. I'd want to appear composed and like I had my shit together and that I was taking action. Some people in Portugal also resented the amount of attention the McCann case was getting compared to missing Portuguese kids. Around this time, the McCanns insisted that the Portuguese police look more seriously into the predictions of psychics about Madeleine's location. Seriously? Portuguese police, at that point you should be like, no. If you want to go pay for that, fine. But we're not doing that because we actually, do police work. As fairly spiritual people, both Jerry and Kate claimed to have had dreams or visions hinting at Madeleine's location. The McCanns also requested that the Portuguese fly over a South American man named Danny Krugel, who claimed to have invented a machine that could detect signs of DNA on the electromagnetic spectrum. Fine, but how about you fly over the South African quack? All Krugel needed was a hair from the victim, and he could create a static field over the search area, which would lead him straight to a concealed body. Krugel was flown over, and perhaps unsurprisingly, the whole thing turned out to be a waste of time. What? No. Gonzalo Amaral speculated that the McCanns' belief in psychics and Krugel's invention was not genuine. It was a ruse. Quote, however naive we may have been, there was a time when we felt that Kate was preparing to disclose the location of her daughter's body without committing herself to the information or compromising herself. On July 10th, there was a confrontation between Robert Murat and 3 members of the McCann party at a police station in Portimao. Alongside the investigators, they all sat around a small table In a cramped interrogation room, Jane Tanner, Russ O'Brien, and Rachel Oldfield gave their version of seeing Murat near the Ocean Club on May 3rd. They spoke with such certainty, with the accused man sitting just across the table. One of them said, quote, "I recognize him because of his eye." Indeed, a detached retina was a fairly uncommon and fairly solid way to identify someone. A friend of mine at university had a detached retina. He was just like, I was just going about my business. And then I just had this big, couldn't really see out of my left eye and everything was looking weird. So I went to the hospital. I had to have emergency surgery to have my retina reattached. But other witnesses who were there that night, including local businessmen who knew Murat and even some off-duty GNR, all later contradicted these claims. According to them, Murat simply was not there. Robert Murat later commented, quote, "The only people who saw me were these 3 people, and that is strange in itself. Do I believe they were confused? No. I think they had every intention of saying what they said, whatever that intention was." With suspicion mounting, Gonzalo Amaral asked his British counterparts to send over specialized sniffer dogs to hunt for the scent of a cadaver or signs of DNA in apartment 5A in the Ocean Club. On July 31st, police dog handler Martin Grime arrived with 2 Springer Spaniels trained for that purpose. Similarly trained dogs have been used with a high rate of success over the years to locate weapons, explosives, bodies, fugitives, and even to sniff out illicit mobile phones in prisons. I wonder what a mobile phone smells like. Well, in prison, probably like arsehole. Grimes brought with him 3-year-old Keela, who was trained to detect human blood and other bodily fluids. She had once accurately located traces of blood that were 36 years old. Holy shit, dog smelling is incredible. Traces of blood that someone had tried to thoroughly clean up. Grime also brought in 7-year-old Eddie, a cadaver dog who had worked on 200 cases, including with the FBI in America. In 6 years of work, Eddie the cadaver dog had never given a false start. He was trained to distinguish between human bodies and other decaying animals, along with ignoring the smell of rotting food. In several cases, Eddie had found places where bodies were buried deep in the ground, and also places where bodies had been kept but later removed. In short, Eddie, Keela, and Martin Grime commanded a great deal of respect from law enforcement in Britain and the US for their work. One of the McCann's PR advisors, Justin McGuinness, later said the McCanns didn't regard the sniffer dogs coming over as in any way negative. The more experts working on a case, surely the better off it was for everybody. But then, of course, there was a surprise. Of course? Wait, what? You're saying that obviously you know what's going to happen next? I have no idea. At 8 p.m. on July 31st, the dogs were introduced one at a time to apartment 5A. First to enter was Eddie, who barked an alert indicating that he detected the scent of a cadaver next to one of the beds in Kate and Jerry's room. Oh my god. Okay, well, again, of course there was a surprise. I did not expect this. Then he barked another alert that he detected the smell of a cadaver behind one of the sofas in the apartment's lounge. Eddie was taken out and Keela the blood dog was brought in. Keela also alerted to the spot behind the sofa. Numerous samples were taken from behind the sofa, chunks of the floor, stray hairs, etc. were sent to a British lab for DNA analysis. A hypothesis later evolved that shortly after being given an overdose, Madeleine had either crawled behind the sofa and died, or had been concealed there after death, perhaps when David Payne swung by the apartment at 6:40 p.m. to ask Kate if she'd take the children to the play area. Notably, the cadaver scent was not detected in Madeleine's bed. According to the hypothesis, she would have died shortly after administering of the sedatives and prior to being put to bed. Oh my god, this is a hell of a conspiracy. So, immediately you'd be like, well, I'm sorry, but their friends are going to grass on them. They're not going to be able to keep that secret. But then if they were also sedating their kids, then they are, because otherwise they're going to get into mega trouble and lose their medical licenses. That would be crazy. That would be so crazy. The next day, August 1st, Eddie and Keela were taken to search along the beach and in the nearby scrubland. They did not alert to anything. Then they were taken to the villa where the McCann family was now staying. Inside the villa, Eddie the cadaver dog alerted to a cabinet which contained Madeleine's bedtime toy, Cuddle Cat. When the cabinet was opened, he alerted to Cuddle Cat itself. In the first few days after Madeleine's disappearance, Kate had carried Cuddle Cat in her hand to all the press appearances, and she had been photographed, unaware, on a balcony holding Cuddle Cat to her face and apparently crying into it and/or smelling it. Then it came out that sometime prior to the sniffer dogs, Kate had washed it, saying it smelt of suntan lotion and had gotten dirty, but despite being washed, Eddie had still detected a cadaver scent on it that had to be explained. This is extremely strange. It was possible that Madeleine McCann had died while holding Cuddle Cat and had lain with it enough for the cadaver scent to pass on to it. How long does it take for a cadaver scent to develop? Oh, here we go. For clarification, after death, such gases can be emitted from the body almost immediately and grow in intensity after a few hours. A cadaver dog is capable of smelling the slightest trace of them, with 40 times the number of nasal receptors than a human. The scent being on Cuddle Cat was consistent with the hypothesis that Madeleine had died of an overdose shortly after being given a sedative and passing out with the bedtime toy in her arms. Whoa. On August the 2nd, Keeler and Eddie were taken to an empty room where various other items belonging to the McCanns were laid out in places on the floor. Both Keeler and Eddie alerted to some of Kate McCann's clothes. It was possible that cadaver and blood scents were transferred to clothes from Madeleine's body, or else transferred from an intermediate object the body had touched. The simplest hypothesis was that Kate was wearing those clothes while holding Madeleine's body. On August the 6th, Eddie and Keeler were taken to a parking garage which contained 10 vehicles used by the McCanns, their 7 friends, Robert Murat, and Sergei Milinka. The dogs were again introduced to the garage separately. Eddie the cadaver dog alerted to the driver's side of the silver Renault that the McCanns had rented 3 weeks after the disappearance. Keeler the blood dog alerted to the boot of the same car. Copious samples were taken from the boot, bits of carpets that might contain DNA, hair, and fingernails. They were sent for analysis in a forensics lab in the UK. Wait, but they had this car several weeks after her disappearance. So wait, how's that connect? There were 2 working hypotheses for why the dogs alerted to a vehicle the McCanns had rented 3 weeks after Madeleine's disappearance. The first, and the most tenuous hypothesis, was that the McCanns had successfully concealed the body near the Ocean Club for over 3 weeks, despite thorough ground searches, and had used the car to transport the body 20-odd days later, despite the McCanns being under almost constant media scrutiny. Yeah, that didn't happen. There's no way. To be fair, it was conceivable that the McCanns could have slipped away from the reporters and photographers for an hour or so, but it was highly doubtful that they'd take the risk in order to transport and dispose of a body with the whole region on high alert. Yeah, that would be crazy. There was also the issue of the smell of a body concealed nearby for 20-odd days in hot weather. Some investigators speculated that the McCanns had kept the body in a refrigerator, but that merely raised the question of where the hell they got the fridge from and why nobody stumbled across it for 3 weeks. No fridge containing DNA has ever been found. No, I don't think this is a realistic situation. The second and more straightforward hypothesis, always nice to get an Occam's razor, was that the McCanns had disposed of Madeleine's body on the night of May the 3rd, and the scents detected by the dogs transferred to the rental car from other items that had previously been in contact with her remains. Yeah, I think that's far more likely. The question was, if the McCanns had concealed her body on the night of May 3rd, when and how did they do so? They picked their kids up from daycare at 5:30 p.m. At 6 p.m., Jerry went to play tennis with his friends and was seen by witnesses. Kate says she gave her children some food and a glass of milk that she always did before bedtime. It has been speculated that the milk would be an ideal way of administering a sedative. This hypothetically places the overdose shortly after 6 p.m. Jerry returned from tennis at 7. If it was Jerry who disposed of the body, that left a 90-minute window during which the grieving parents would have to calm down, formulate a plan, and then smuggle the body out of the apartment. Then they appeared at dinner shortly after 8:30 p.m. If Kate disposed of the body, that widens the time window to approximately 2 hours and 30 minutes. And if the rest of the McCann party were active participants in concealing the death rather than merely covering up the act of allegedly sedating their kids, that extended the window to any time between 5:30 and 10 p.m. They merely needed to lie about Jerry or Kate's movements during the evening. But the idea of swearing 9 people into perpetual secrecy to conceal the accidental death of a child seems unlikely. Yeah, and this is something that, I don't know, we're 20 years down the line, so these people are still in their 50s. I think if this is the case, it won't be concealed forever because you'll have deathbed confessions. Or, once they've stopped practicing medicine and have, outrun the statute of limitations or whatever, I feel like this will come out eventually. Still pretty skeptical. As one investigator pointed out, it would have been a difficult subject to broach at dinner. Would it? Would it? Be like, look, we're all going to get into big trouble because we've been drugging our kids. We all have to stay silent about this, or there will be enormous consequences for all of us. Seems like a pretty simple conversation to have, to be honest. It's more likely, in this hypothetical scenario, that the other members of the McCann party genuinely believed Madeleine had gone missing and had agreed to suppress knowledge that they were neglecting or sedating their kids in order to avoid blowback in the form of social stigma, endangered medical licenses, and losing their kids to social workers. But then one would have to explain why the McCann party was so eager to point the finger at Robert Murat when it was clear that he wasn't at the Ocean Club that night. As unlikely as swearing 9 people into covering up the death of a child may be, stranger things have happened in the annals of human crime. It'd be very interesting to see, as time grinds on, what happens here. It's been a long time. We haven't had something like that, as far as I know. Finally, there was also the consideration that on the morning of May 4th, Kate and Jerry McCann had another often overlooked opportunity to dispose of the body. The McCanns claimed that they left the apartment of David and Fiona Payne, where they'd tried to get an hour's sleep, at 5 or 6 a.m. The McCanns say they went off to look for Madeleine. The search party had been suspended at 4 a.m, and most people had gone to get some sleep. The press had yet to place the McCanns under scrutiny. If Madeleine's body had been concealed somewhere near the Ocean Club the night before, then here was a golden opportunity, a 3 to 4 hour window during which the McCanns could have disposed of the body unobserved before they were due in the resort parking lot at 9 a.m. As to how the body could have been disposed of, the most likely scenario is that Madeleine was concealed in a weighted bag and dropped in the sea. There were plenty of rowboats and small tubs with motors around that could have been co-opted unseen, or they could have gotten in a vehicle and thrown the bag off one of the many coastal cliffs in the area to be carried off by the receding tides and the Atlantic current. Or they could have travelled a few minutes into the countryside and dropped the remains down one of 100 old abandoned water wells, each of which were 50 to 100 feet deep. Or they could have dropped the body into the nearby Bralvura Dam, which was searched by divers but by no means comprehensively. Or they could have buried the body in a deep grave in a forest or scrubland and then covered up the spot with brush. The last of these scenarios is the least likely, given how dirty, labour-intensive and time-consuming such a thing would be. Or none of the above speculations are even remotely accurate, and Madeleine was indeed abducted. And the Portuguese police, the British police, and the media at large were entertaining an utterly cruel conspiracy theory about the McCanns that simply wasn't true. At which point, we're left with the possibility that 2 separate sniffer dogs, trained to find traces of cadavers and DNA with unimpeachable track records, had suddenly made multiple mistakes in the space of a few days in apartment 5A, with Cuddle Cat, with McCann's clothes, and with the McCann's rental car. There's something up there, isn't it? Because those dogs don't make mistakes. It should be noted that as damning as the sniffer dogs were, such things are not conclusive without being substantiated by further forensic evidence. Yeah, because they're just dogs. Like, I get that it's really good, but I mean, that can't be enough to put someone away. Dogs cannot articulate why they alert to things. They cannot sit you down and gently explain over a cup of tea. Perhaps someone had died in the apartment previously, though there's no record of it, and perhaps a previous guest had bled, drooled, vomited, or ejaculated behind the sofa. The same sort of exculpatory logic could also apply to the rental car. Yeah. Someone used that car previously to dispose of a body. Who was the owner of the car? Oh, God. Much rested on the DNA evidence taken from apartment 5A and the silver Renault. Meanwhile, in defiance of the Portuguese law of secrecy around criminal investigations, unidentified members of the police allegedly leaked details of the dog searches and the DNA samples to the media. The leaks were information only known to the police. A week later, a Portuguese reporter asked the McCanns, quote, "If the blood is really from Madeleine, how could you explain it?" I mean, just say, I can't, because it's not. Taken aback by the boldness of the question, visibly frustrated Jerry struggled for words, stuttering an answer that involved the phrase, "We don't know." Meanwhile, Kate spoke over the top of him, saying with much more composure, "Well, at the moment, it's all speculation." And indeed it was. The Storm. Back on July 23rd, Jerry flew to the US for a meeting with the director of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, which also had an international wing. Then he met Alberto Gonzalez, the US Attorney General, and members of Congress. Then he appeared as a guest on the US television program America's Most Wanted. Jerry returned to Portugal on July 30th, and he and Kate started making a YouTube channel as part of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children's Don't You Forget About Me campaign. Around this time, the McCann's PR advisor, Justin McGuinness, asked a colleague, David Hughes, to come down from London to help handle the overwhelming press attention. His first assignment was managing an appearance Jerry and Kate were doing on the UK religious program Heaven and Earth. Remember, we used to get 4 channels when I was a kid. And on Channel 4, on like the weekends, you'd be like, "Oh, what should we watch?" You know, you'd just want some Saturday morning cartoons or whatever. And it'd be like, was it Channel 4 or BBC 2 or something? You'd get Songs of Praise, which is basically just hymns. People singing hymns in a church. And you're like, no, I don't want Songs of Praise. I want cartoons. During the interview, on August 8th, Jerry and Kate talked about how Madeleine's disappearance tested, then reaffirmed their faith. Jesus Christ. This kind of stuff is like why I don't believe in higher powers or good stuff like this. And like, look, there's a fucking load of horrible shit going on in the world all the time. Like, you think Gaza, Ukraine, Sudan, like hundreds of thousands, millions of people just being killed and displaced. And you're all like, reaffirm my faith in God. If God's real, he's a douchebag. Kate said she asked God, why do this to Madeleine? Why have you let this happen? But you realize that God hasn't done this. Somebody else has done this. All right, chill. So you basically choose what God does and doesn't do. After the interview, the McCanns got a phone call from a PR advisor, Alex Woolfall, who had told them that the Ocean Club was requesting they no longer put Sean and Emily in their daycare service while they went off to do interviews and public appearances. The reason cited was that other parents had complained about the scrum of media types around the daycare. Shortly afterward, the McCanns received a phone call from the police. They were summoned to PJ headquarters in Portimao. Upon arrival, they were taken into an interrogation room. After some preliminaries, Jerry was asked to leave. Then the two investigators grilled Kate for the better part of an hour, telling her they did not believe her version of events and suggesting that her memory was at fault. Kate burst into tears, sobbing and gasping for breath, but she stuck to her story. Then Jerry was brought in and interrogated separately. Smart. Standard police stuff there. Split them up. Jerry showed no sign of weakness and quite unsurprisingly seemed insulted by the suggestion that he and his wife were lying. Jerry asked the investigators if this was now a murder inquiry, and the answer was yes. On August the 10th, PJ spokesman Olegario de Souza told the press that they were now looking into the possibility that Madeleine had been killed. He did not mention by whom, but for the press, the implication was clear. The Polizia Judiciaria suspected the McCanns of murder or manslaughter. August the 11th marked 100 days since Madeleine had disappeared. That morning, the McCanns attended mass at the local church. Afterwards, they got up to say a few words and left the church to a round of applause. Returning to the villa, the McCanns met a police liaison, Ricardo Pava, who revealed to them for the first time what the dogs had found in apartment 5A. Their initial reaction appears to have been confusion and frustration. Kate asked how an intruder could have killed Madeleine in apartment 5A and then cleaned up any mess in such a short time frame. Pava gave a vague answer, when the truth was the police no longer believed that there was an intruder. It was now that Jerry began making noises about returning home to the UK, despite having previously declared that they'd stay in Portugal until at least the end of the summer. David Hughes thought returning to the UK was a bad idea and would feed rumours of the McCanns' guilt. On August 23rd, the McCanns did an interview for the Spanish news show Telecino. The interviewer's questions all pertained to the investigation, the sniffer dogs, and the question of blood. Jerry and Kate repeated that they were bound by Portuguese law not to discuss the details of the investigation, so the interviewer asked, quote, when you heard police had found blood in the apartment, how did you react? At this point, Jerry started to unhook the mic from his collar. He stood up saying, you know what? This is all investigation. These are all questions about the investigation, and I cannot comment on the investigation. The reporter replied, I asked about your reaction, not the investigation. Kate was still seated in front of the camera, trying to calm Jerry and get him to sit back down. But Jerry had enough. He walked out. When Telecino aired the interview, the focus was entirely on how, quote, Jerry cracked. Jerry didn't crack, he just didn't want to be there. From a PR perspective, storming out after being asked about signs of blood in the apartment was not a good look, and it fed more public suspicions. The next day, August the 24th, Jerry flew to Scotland to appear at the Edinburgh Television Festival. He gave several interviews complaining about media speculation about his and Kate's involvement in the disappearance of their daughter. He declared that they would be withdrawing from the limelight, restricting media appearances to those that seemed likely to help their daughter. Some commentators interpreted this as the McCanns restricting themselves only to journalists who were sympathetic and did not question their version of events. On August 27th, the Ocean Club informed the McCanns that they'd need to vacate the villa they'd been staying at by September the 11th. As helpful as the Ocean Club had been since May 3rd, it seemed as though they had a change of heart as suspicions against the McCanns mounted. I don't know if they're paying for that villa or whatnot, but their generosity is only going to extend so far. On August 29th, Jerry made a post on his daily blog that is notable for reasons that will soon become clear. He finished by addressing the kidnapper directly, quote, if you've done something you regret, if you find yourself in a situation you never intended, it's not too late to do the right thing. Please come forward. Return Madeleine. Leave her in a place of safety. Jim Gamble, head of CEOP in the UK, later revealed that he'd coached Jerry on the phrasing of this appeal, but Gamble now suspected Jerry. His coaching had an ulterior motive. Quote, when Jerry talked about the possibility of writing an appeal, I helped construct a letter by just providing some advice about what I think you would say. You know, I'd do it along the lines of, sometimes people make mistakes, terrible mistakes in life, that they never intended, but ultimately, it was never too late to do the right thing. But in shaping that, I was actually talking to Jerry. I think it was the only way of delivering that message or reflecting that thought It's something that happened. If it was a mistake, it's never too late to come out and stop all of this, end quote. Around that time, several Portuguese and British newspapers began running completely unsubstantiated claims that the McCanns were swingers having sex with the other members of their holiday party. Again, based on what? And even if they were, what does that have to do with this? What does this have to do with the disappearance? What they get up to in their personal lives is kind of their own business. It's not illegal. The McCanns would later launch a libel suit against those publications. Excellent. But worse was yet to come. On August the 31st, the newspaper Tal and Qual ran the headline, "PJ believes that parents killed Maddie." According to several sources, the McCanns had apparently known about this story since August 24th, and their people had tried to have it pulled, but to no success. The article suggested Madeleine had died of an accidental overdose. The McCanns lawyered up and began proceedings to sue Tal and Qual, but eventually dropped the case when the newspaper went out of business. Meanwhile, PR advisor Justin McGuinness made a statement. "The past 120 days have been horrific for us, our family, and friends. We have tried to ignore some of the more ludicrous speculation, but we simply could not ignore T&Q's report." Meanwhile, 2 general practitioners in the UK had been doctors for the McCann family, denied ever prescribing them sedatives. This had limited value for some commenters, however, since the McCanns were themselves doctors, theoretically with plenty of off-the-books access to drugs, but people who had babysat for the McCanns also said that they'd never seen Jerry and Kate sedate their children. Additionally, Kate's father spoke to The Sun in the UK, denying that the McCanns had heavily sedated their kids on the night in question. How would he know? But admittedly, there was a possibility Madeleine had been given Calpol, a mild paracetamol painkiller that causes drowsiness. Quote, "Kate may have used Calpol to help her sleep, but it's just outrageous to think of anything else." Yeah, that's true. What's it called? Antihistamine. There's an antihistamine drug for kids, like if they have an allergic reaction to something, that also makes them super tired. So it's like a couple of times, like the kids had an just like a rash or whatever, and you can give it to them. And it's like they just go to sleep so well, and you're like, God damn. Oh, I wish they had more allergic reactions. Oh God, not an appropriate joke in today's episode, is it? Okay. For the record, it's pretty difficult to overdose on Calpol, and Madeleine likely would have been showing symptoms of liver damage prior to May 3rd if excessive Calpol was their regular method of sedation. And as doctors, the McCanns would have known not to feed her a whole pack of pills. If an overdose happened, it would likely have needed to be a much heavier sedative. Calpol, I believe, isn't pills. It's a syrup. The McCanns gave an interview. Doesn't make a difference, I'm just saying. The McCanns gave an interview on Portuguese television where the interviewer asked, "That evening, did you give your kids something like Calpol to help them sleep?" The McCanns both looked exasperated. Kate slightly shook her head, her expression one of disgust. Jerry said, quote, "We're not going to comment on anything, but, there is absolutely no way we used any sort of sedative drugs, anything like that." I have to say, it is nice to get a complete flat denial like this, which I don't think we'd seen so far. By the time Sean and Amelie were tested for signs of drugs in their systems, partly at the McCanns' insistence, it was 4 months after their disappearance. Well, they're doctors, they know it's not there anymore. Hairs that could have contained traces had already been cut, and we shall never know why the twins slept through the night of May 3rd amid all the noise and chaos. We shall never know if the McCanns drugged them, or if an abductor did. If the latter, it was unclear how the sedatives could have been administered to the children by a stranger in the apartment. Yeah, this just seems like a huge stretch. Like an abductor did it? Within such a brief time window and without knowing when someone would return. Injecting the children with a needle would have left a mark and risked waking them up and them crying out. Waking them to administer a pill would have carried similar risks, and there was no guarantee that the kids would trust a stranger in their dark bedroom enough to swallow it. I hope not. Trying to force a pill or serum into their mouths while they slept would also risk waking them up, along with a choking hazard. Yeah, this would not be possible. I got kids. You can't just randomly give them, here, have some Calpol while they're sleeping. Their mouths will just be like, it's not happening. Some experts said the most likely drug would have been chloroform, administered by applying a cloth soaked in it to the face. But chloroform would have left a strong odor in the room, unlikely to be mitigated in less than 30 minutes before Kate arrived, even by the abductor opening the window. And the smell of chloroform would also linger on Sean and Amelie's faces. Gonzalo Amaral later asserted, quote, "A lot of noise, and the twins never woke up, and they left to go to another apartment still sleeping. Madeleine's mother spent the whole night checking on how the twins were breathing, if they were breathing or not, if they were all right. She was worried about them. So this is all very strange." As proof of the sedative hypothesis, Tal and Qual cited a source close to the investigation, in other words, a police leak. Olegario de Souza later claimed that some investigators were leaking details to the press in order to rattle the McCanns, and force them to confess and negotiate a plea. Arguidos. On September the 3rd, the Polizia Judiciaria put in a request with Leicestershire Police to inspect clothing worn by other members of the McCann party who had long since returned to the UK. The PJ... Oh, right, that's like the Portuguese FBI. I took a break. It's the next day. So, like, that's actually a lie. It's 3 days later because it was the weekend and I didn't want to admit it, but I'm not gonna. I'll do my best. Everyone else is like, Simon, you just talked about this 30 seconds ago. For me, it was last Friday. All right, this is a very long episode. The PJ wanted to use the cadaver and blood dogs on the clothing that the McCann party wore that night. The PJ also requested to search the McCann home in Rothley and confiscate any potential evidence. Like what? Oh, I suppose if they're thinking they drugged the kids, then I guess they could be like drugs or like Yeah, drugs. I'm thinking like sedatives, right? They wanted to question teachers at Madeleine's nursery school, babysitters, and any non-family members who might have known the little girl. British authorities did not grant these requests. Well, why not do it for them? Like, I understand they're not very keen on having like another country's police force come and search on a property well outside of their jurisdiction. But why not just ask the British police to do it instead and then pass anything useful on? Also on September the 3rd, PJ liaison Ricardo Paiva told the McCanns to come to the station in 3 days' time and to bring their lawyer. You should have had your lawyer there from much earlier on. According to Paiva's report, Kate reacted with anger and anxiety, saying, "What are my parents going to think? What is the press going to say when they find out? The Portuguese are under pressure from the government to finish the investigation quickly. Just go. Just go with the flow." Like, people understand the difference between being questioned by the police and being guilty of something. According to Paiva, Jerry handed over more letters and emails he'd received from tipsters, psychics, and mediums that pointed towards locations where Madeleine might be found. Oh my god, can you imagine being the police being like, "All right, Jez. Sure, we'll be looking into those medium things right away, Jester. Yes, sir. Go on," and then just burn them. Jerry said there was no evidence tying them to the disappearance and that the police were wasting their time looking into them. But you've got to understand, it's always the husband, it's always the wife, it's all, this is like how things usually are. You have to understand that, like, you're innocent, but they don't, and you have to understand that. I understand it's difficult at a time like this, blah, 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 but I mean, yeah. Paiva's report says that previously the McCanns had reacted negatively to the sniffer dogs being brought in, contrary to what their PR advisor claimed, and they stressed that police focus should remain on the abduction theory and Robert Murat. Yeah, except we know that Murat is not guilty. He has an alibi, and we know, right? Again, it was the weekend. And we know that to find a kid, sniffer dogs seem like a great idea, so it's weird you'd be negative to this. On September the 4th, the newspaper Correio de Mana ran a false story that the police had found a syringe in apartment 5A. Wow, I hope you get sued the shit out of. Just to do that is crazy. Also, they wouldn't be drugging with a syringe. They'd just grind up pills and put them in the food like a normal parent. The story was picked up by the Daily Express in the UK. Oh yes, the Daily Express, that bastion of quality reporting. That's sarcasm. But the police never found a syringe, and it would have been a forensic bonanza if they did. That same morning, the Polizia Judiciaria received a preliminary report from the British lab analysing DNA samples taken from the floor of apartment 5A and carpet from the rental car. The samples were too small to determine if the DNA traces in either location were left from blood, saliva, vomit, etc. This in itself is not too discouraging, since if Madeleine overdosed on sedatives, there'd be no reason to bleed, but plenty of reasons to drool or be sick. Yeah, but is she going to be I'm assuming they're putting... Oh my god, this is grim. But again, allegedly, I don't personally believe this yet. Or, I don't know, like with what we've seen so far, I don't think so. I think, why would there be a reason for her to drool in the back of the car if she's already passed? But the DNA samples taken from the boot of the car were thoroughly inconclusive. They had at least 3 contributors, all of them from the McCann family, and the lab could not determine if Madeleine was one of them. Jerry, Kate, and the twins had used the car for months by the time the sample was taken. It was far more likely that it was them. As for the sample taken from behind the sofa in 5A, it was also inconclusive, but with a closer match for Madeleine McCann's DNA, up to 75%. But this was certainly not enough to charge anyone with a crime, much less secure a conviction. The police needed a confession. Yeah, is that so? 75% likelihood that it's hers. Basically, surely that means it could be another member of the families or whatnot. Well, let's see. The summary from the British lab was written in English, and it was translated by the PJ into Portuguese. The translation shed many of the caveats that the British summary had included, and focused on how the samples matched components of Madeleine's DNA. In the years since, there's been some claims that the PJ stupidly misunderstood the results. Well, it sounds like it was just lost in translation, right? But the truth was much more cynical. The PJ knew the DNA tests were not conclusive, obviously not enough to win a trial. What they needed was a confession. Accordingly, alleged police leaks to the press claimed that the DNA results were far more decisive than they actually were. I don't think this is... I mean, David describes it as cynical. I think this is pretty smart policing. Like, I mean, this is good. Like, pressure them, and if they don't crack, then it's less likely they're guilty. Because if someone says, oh, the DNA matched, and you know you're innocent, you're going to be like, what are you talking about? That is literally impossible. Like, I have no idea how that could possibly be possible. Whereas if you're guilty, you'll be like, what do I do now? One Portuguese reporter claimed that Gonçalo Amaral himself told her the results were 80% a match and possibly up to 100%. All of this hit the newspapers in the days running up to the McCann's interrogation. Clever police work again. They're not telling them exactly, they're just leaking it to the press, and they know that's going to get back to the McCann's, so that's a much cleverer way of potentially eliciting a confession. There was a likely reason why the police left a gap of 3 days before questioning began to cause the McCann's to panic. Yep, again, clever policing. Ethical? Yeah, I'd say so. On September the 6th, Kate McCann arrived at the police station in Portimão with her Portuguese lawyer and PR advisor by her side. They were mobbed by a sea of reporters and onlookers. During an interrogation, which lasted 11 hours, police asked Kate what medicine she had kept in apartment 5A. She replied Calpol and Nurofen in adult and children's doses. She denied administering either to the children during the holiday. In her memoir, Kate McCann describes the interview as long and occasionally frustrating, but, quote, the atmosphere still seemed quite amenable. I didn't feel intimidated or threatened. The more information available to the police, I reasoned, the more complete the jigsaw would be, and the greater the chance of us finding Madeleine. Afterwards, Kate's lawyer drove her back to her villa where Jerry was waiting, and the lawyer reviewed the evidence the police had against them. The sniffer dogs, the DNA, and apparently a witness had seen Jerry and Kate carrying a big black bag and acting suspiciously. The lawyer concluded, quote, if you were Portuguese, this would be enough to put you in prison. Really? It doesn't seem like an awful lot. This wasn't true. Okay, good. And it was not what the police thought at the time, but the Portuguese lawyer was building up to something. He told the McCanns that the police had offered Kate a plea deal. Kate could confess to the accidental death and concealing of the body. She'd likely get 2 years in prison. Jerry would walk without jail time. But if Kate did not confess, both she and Jerry would face life in prison. I mean, wait, you're the lawyer. Just be like, guys, they don't have shit. Why are you on the police's side? What's going on? In reality, the cops did not have enough evidence yet to press charges. All right, then lawyer, chill. Don't take the plea deal. Don't take, unless you've seen this evidence yourself. Be like, yo, police, I'm going to need to see that. Wait, isn't this like basic lawyering? Because the police will be like, well, we got you on camera. And you'll be like, oh no. And the lawyer will be like, chill. I'm going to need to see that camera. that tape, thank you. The inconclusive DNA results were not going to be a clincher. This was all a ploy to extract a confession. Right, and what I'm saying is the Portuguese lawyer should be able to see through that shit fairly transparently. According to the lawyer, and later repeated by Gonçalo Amaral, quote, her reaction was very violent. Kate's memoirs confirm she was angry and gave the lawyer quite the dressing down. Meanwhile, Jerry, according to Kate, sank to his knees and began sobbing, saying again and again, oh, we're finished. Our life is over. After a few minutes, Jerry rallied and shouted at his lawyer, they have nothing. Well, Jerry's bang on, isn't he? He began listing the shortcomings in the PJ's case. Yeah, right, this is what your lawyers... You need a new lawyer, I'm sorry. Whoever this guy is, unless I'm really missing something, at this point I'll be like, you're fired. The next day, September the 7th, Kate McCann went in for questioning again. She wasn't there for quite as long this time. The police read her a list of 40 questions. What did they keep next to their bed where the dog smelt a cadaver? Why, from the outset, had Kate insisted Madeleine had been abducted? Well, because that's what you'd naturally fear, isn't it? Why did the twins, Sean and Emily, sleep through the chaos? Was Kate accustomed to giving her children medication? Did her children ever drive her to anger and despair? Oh my god, did her children ever drive her to anger and despair? You may be asked that by the police. Are you fucking joking? Literally every day, mate. I'm just joking, I love my kids, but I do despair sometimes. Like, oh, for God's sake. Any parent who's not despairing, who are you? Kate was also shown a video of the alerts given by the two dogs, which, if you're curious, can now be viewed online. As Kate sat there, she declined to answer every single question. She muttered under her breath, "Bloody tosser, bloody tosser." After the interrogation, she was taken outside before the press and a police spokesperson declared her arguida. Ooh, a formal suspect, I remember that. At the time, police thought Kate was the overdoser and Jerry was an accomplice in covering it up and disposing of the body. Allegedly. I don't think we need to say allegedly there. This is just what the police think. It's definitely not what we think. I mean, maybe it's what you think. I'm not one to judge. I mean, beyond all reasonable doubt, no chance. Beyond doubt, in my mind, no. Maybe? Yes. Maybe yes. Maybe. I don't think it's the most likely thing, but I think a maybe. The same day, Jerry showed up in a separate car for his turn. He was interviewed for 4 hours. Look, I don't think the cops are doing wrong here. But I just don't buy it. I just don't think I think they should be pursuing this. And I think, unfortunately, the parents have to go through this. But I don't believe it. Several sources claim the cops didn't sweat him for as long because they thought he was too cold and controlled, while Kate might be easier to break. Which is why you have a lawyer who is cold and controlled. That's what the lawyer is. They're like, quiet. And you shut the f*** up. Although maybe, I don't know, maybe your lawyer was just like, I'm not going to go to this one, I'm busy. Get a better lawyer. You have loads of money from all the stuff, all the donations and whatnot. Use some of that on a lawyer. Your doctors, use some of your money. Either way, Jerry answered the questions put to him. He was asked whether he had taken part in Madeleine's disappearance. His answer was no. Whether his wife ever suffered from depression? No. Whether Kate had ever talked about giving Madeleine away? No. Whether they had ever sedated their children? No. Then Jerry was shown the sniffer dog video. He remarked that the alert behind the sofa could be explained by Madeleine having a nosebleed, to which she was prone, but he did not remember her having one during the holiday. He added about the video, quote, "I don't see anything that will help me find my daughter." Like Kate, Jerry was taken outside the police station before the mob of journalists, and a PJ spokesman declared him arguido. Jerry's expression during the announcement could be characterized as one of scorn, anger, and defiance. The footage is available online. I'll leave it to the audience to decide whether that expression stems from an innocent man wrongfully accused or a guilty man angered at being found out. One thing is clear, he was furious. I'd be pretty fucking furious, assuming I'm innocent. I mean, yeah, if it can be interpreted either way, then I don't think that means anything. Having declared them arguidos, the police now had a right to use much more aggressive investigative tactics, like had been done with Robert Murat. More searches, more questioning. In fact, the police now technically had the right to hold the McCanns in custody for months, separated from each other and from their twins. The cops could keep up the pressure until one of them cracked. That doesn't sound very good, because until one of them cracks, what if there's nothing for them to crack to? They'd crack anyway and do a false confession because they're being held in custody for months, just gradually being worn down by the police. The next 2 days came with mixed messages from the media. Some reports said the McCanns intended to stay in Portugal to find Madeleine and prove their innocence. Others said they were going to flee back to the UK. They were due to attend Sunday Mass in Praia de Luz on September 9th. But at the last moment, this was cancelled. On the morning of September the 9th, the McCanns got into their rental car and drove to the airport. Can they do that as Arguida? Or Arguido? Plural, I assume? Isn't that the point where they're like, don't leave the country? PR advisor David Hughes later claimed that he had argued against this move since it would seem to confirm their guilt. According to Hughes, Jerry McCann thanked him for his advice and overruled him. Hughes was to go back with them to the UK, while Justin McGuinness was to stay in Portugal to handle the press fallout. A fleet of journalists followed the McCann's car to the airport. At the gates to the tarmac, Justin McGuinness made a statement, quote, "They are returning to Britain after careful thought. They wish to reintroduce the twins as much as possible to an ordinary life in their home country. This made no mention of their Arguido status." Some commenters in Portugal and Britain felt that attributing the decision to the twins was a fairly limp explanation. Does it matter? They're allowed to do what they want, unless they've been told they can't. 1/3 of the EasyJet flight to the UK was booked up by journalists at the last minute. At one point, the pilot had to threaten to call the cops on one camera crew if they didn't settle down. That's got to be very unpleasant. Arriving in the UK, Jerry gave a statement on the tarmac, quote, "Whilst it's heartbreaking to return to the UK without Madeleine, it does not mean that we're giving up our search for her. We cannot give up on our daughter until we know what happens." Also, wait a minute. It's not like they're fleeing. It's not like they're going into hiding or going to a non-extradition treaty. It's the UK. They're gonna, have an agreement with Portugal. He continues, "We have to keep doing everything we can to find her. Portuguese law prohibits us from commenting further on the police investigation. Despite there being so much we wish to say, we are unable to do so, except to say this. We have played no part in the disappearance of our lovely daughter Madeleine." As bad as it looked for the McCanns to quickly return to the UK after being declared suspects, the greater failure rested with the Policia Judiciaria. They had lumped everything on the gambit of extracting a confession, using a very aggressive approach to the McCanns, causing them to flee. Now their investigation would have to be conducted through a wall of lawyers and several layers of British police bureaucracy. Honestly, this seems like a very... It should have been this way already, not the police bureaucracy, but the lawyers. There should be a wall of lawyers. Gonçalo Amaral did not expect his British counterparts to always be cooperative. The Portuguese authorities had gambled, and they had lost. I mean, I would do the same thing if I'm innocent in their position. Because you're thinking, I don't know the Portuguese legal system, my lawyer doesn't seem extremely competent, allegedly in my opinion, and I'll be like, yeah, at least if I go back to the UK, things are going to get a second look in by the police there, which I have more faith in, being them from my country and whatnot, and that sounds good to me. The police bureaucracy sounds good to me, because I don't think, like, even if there's an extradition treaty, right? If the police in Britain are like, well, you're not going to get fairly treated by the Portuguese authorities, so we're not going to extradite you, it's going to be a diplomatic incident, but it happens. Ruins and ashes. On the weekends that the McCanns departed for the UK, alleged police leaks to the media were coming in thick and fast. Some of them were claiming that the DNA was 99% a match to Madeleine. A leak to the Sunday Times claimed that Madeleine's body had been stored in a refrigerator. This hypothetical fridge was the only way to directly tie remains to the rental car, but this ultimately served to undermine the PJ's case. Where had the McCanns gotten a fridge? How could they have concealed the body for weeks? How could they have slipped away and disposed of the body with the world watching? The cadaver scent could easily have been transferred to the car by intermediate objects. The DNA test was inconclusive, and police focusing on the car rather than McCanns disposing of the body on either the night of May the 3rd or the morning of May 4th was likely a mistake. Yeah, agreed. They're going to get a child-sized fridge? Come on now. Meanwhile, the Portuguese police put in more requests with their British counterparts. They wanted further access to Cuddle Cat, which had been returned to the McCanns. Oh, Madeleine McCann's toy. They wanted Kate's diary. They wanted Jerry's laptop. They wanted to conduct mobile phone tracking of everyone in the McCann party to figure out their movements on May 3rd. That sounds fine. Why not get those? That sounds completely fine. Why wouldn't they get that? They wanted to question the McCanns again. The British authorities ultimately did not grant these requests. I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? The bureaucracy is actually helping them here. I don't think looking at the diary or his laptop are warranted, but tracking their movements on a mobile phone, that seems completely sensible. Internally, some doubts and dissenting opinions started to grow among the Portuguese. The National Police Chief, Alipio Ribeiro, pointed out that the DNA results were not conclusive, which was absolutely true. The Attorney General, Pinto Monteiro, said that there was not enough evidence to justify questioning the McCanns again. Many aspects of their story did not add up, but these were circumstantial. PJ spokesman Olegario de Souza resigned, saying he would no longer be caught in the middle of a propaganda war between the British and the Portuguese, and that the police leaks, exaggerating the weight of the DNA evidence, were designed to pressure the McCanns to confess. Good for you. I mean, I understand, this is interesting, because I ethically approve of what the police did. To me, that seems fine to pressure them, because you got to know. But for him to resign over this, the Attorney General? Wait, no, sorry, the spokesman for the PJ resigned. Good for you. Then the British lab submitted its final report. It said samples were minimal and in poor condition. Their overall conclusion was, quote, "The results do not help clarify whether or not the DNA results obtained within the scope of this case were from Madeleine McCann." Again, in my mind, I'm kind of like, the Portuguese authorities be like, British police protecting these people or whatever. But I'm like, yo, British police would also want people who killed a child to face justice. The Policia Judiciaria thus had no solid evidence to substantiate the alerts from the cadaver and blood dogs, and little evidence to justify the aggressive pursuit of the McCanns as suspects. That's okay. It's okay to aggressively pursue a suspect, as long as you're forcing a confession out of them, which they're not. Aggressive pursuit of suspects is what the police do. When they don't, I get annoyed. Please do note that this was not an exoneration. There was still zero explanation for why there were cadaver and blood scents in apartment 5A, in the car, on Cuddle Cat, and on Kate's clothing. But prosecutors did not require one. It just remains a lingering question that has not been and probably never will be resolved, at least not beyond speculating that the sniffer dogs had simply made multiple mistakes, which doesn't seem likely. We went through their records, and they were very, very good at sniffing. But things got worse for the Polizia Giudiziaria. In late September, an anonymous email to the official website of Prince Charles claimed, without evidence, that a disgruntled former female employee of Ocean Club had kidnapped Madeleine. Wait, why are we listening to this? This seems crazy. Is there something more to it? Because I'm sure lots of crazy tips from crazy people came in. But why are we listening to this one? On October the 1st, Gonzalo Amaro got a phone call from a reporter asking for comment. Amaro replied that the email was of little interest and that the British police should pay more attention to the Portuguese investigation. Yes, exactly. Of course you would be. He went on to say, quote, "They have only been working on what the McCann couple want and what suits them, forgetting that the couple are suspects in the death of their daughter Madeleine. I mean, they're suspects to you. I think the British police are like, you don't have anything." On October the 2nd, Amaro's comments were printed in the British press. It set off a diplomatic storm. British authorities, and the Leicestershire police in particular, rejected the notion that they were somehow the McCann's puppets. Yeah, exactly. Why would they be? According to several sources, Prime Minister Gordon Brown personally got involved, demanding Amaro be removed from the investigation. God damn, this went right to the top, didn't it? On October the 3rd, the very next day, Gonzalo Amaro was indeed removed as the head of the PJ unit in Portimao and told to report to headquarters in Faro. Yeah. When the Prime Minister of another country gets involved in it, it's like, hey, what's up? You gotta listen. I guess you couldn't, but these countries are friends. Amaro resigned from the police force within a year. God damn, Gordon Brown throwing his weight around. Chief Inspector Paolo Rebello took over the Portuguese investigation. In a public statement, Rebello called reports that the McCanns were involved in their daughter's disappearance mere speculation and said that all lines of inquiry are still open. This was a decidedly more conciliatory approach to calm diplomatic waters. The McCanns, however, still remained arguidos, and internally, the Portuguese investigation still heavily suspected the McCanns sending more samples from the rental car to a Portuguese lab to double-check the British results. Why did they send it to Britain in the first place? Was it just because they had the lab that was capable of doing this? They were also inconclusive. Rebello's team again requested to interview the McCanns. The PJ's theory remained that Madeleine had died of an accidental death sometime before the McCanns had appeared at dinner. Meanwhile, a further nail was put in the coffin of Gonzalo Amaro's career. Portuguese and British newspapers started running stories about another child abduction case he had investigated in 2004. An 8-year-old girl, Jonah Cipriano, had gone missing 14 miles from Praia de Luz. The girl's uncle, João Cipriano, confessed during a videotaped interview that Jonah walked in on him and his mother, Leonor, having sex. To cover up the incest, oh right, wait, for a moment I was like, it's the brother-in-law and the mother, but it's like, nope. I was like, surely that, no. Oh my god, they killed her, dismembered her, and kept her in a fridge before later feeding her remains to pigs. Oh my god, I feel bad about making a joke literally 30 seconds ago. That's fucking horrible. DNA evidence was found in the fridge. Leonor and João Cipriano were convicted at trial, with the mother getting 20 years, the uncle getting 19. Then from prison, Leonor claimed that she had been tortured into confessing by the PJ. She produced photographs where her eyes were blackened, her face swollen, and her body bruised. Holy shit. I mean, you could have just been beaten up by anyone or done it to yourself. Is there something more to back that up? Dates for the photos could not be determined, nor could it be explained why she waited until her trial to recant. João never supported this story, nor claimed to have been tortured. But in prison, he changed his story to Leonor selling Jonah to sex traffickers to support her drug addiction. If you look at the videotape of Joe's first confession, he isn't visibly injured, but you can tell that the man is likely mentally ill. The detectives who questioned Leonor Cipriano were cleared of wrongdoing. Okay, so it seems like maybe it's just made up. Is there any evidence to show that the police beat her? But Gonzalo Amaro, who did not conduct the interrogations, was accused of making a false statement in a report about the case in order to protect his colleagues. He was actually declared arguido on May 4th, 2007, the day after Madeleine had disappeared. The press used the controversy to assert that Gonzalo Amaro and the Polizia Giudiziaria were in the habit of pinning child disappearances on the parents, and they apparently had a fetish for fridges. British news reports often accompanied this claim with innuendo that the Portuguese police wanted to pin Madeleine's disappearance on foreigners so the Algarve tourist industry would not take too heavy. of a financial hit. In November, news reports circulated that Gerry and Kate McCann had a private meeting with the other members of their party, now sometimes referred to as the quote-unquote tapas 7, at a hotel near Rothley in Leicestershire. The McCann spokesman said it was really just to get together to discuss where they were at. Clearly, some might face further questioning at some stage. It was not to change stories or compare notes. This was in no way to get their stories straight. Yeah, I mean, that's completely fair. Like, what are we supposed to do? Oh, you're never allowed to get together with your mates again and talk about this horrible thing that you went to get through together. That's crazy. In December 2007, Rebello's team put in another request to interview the 7 members of the McCann party. They wanted all 9 people, including Gerry and Kate, to return to Praia de Luz to do a reconstruction of the events of May 3rd. The McCann party stated they had no objections to being questioned again from Britain, but they refused to return to Portugal. They questioned the purpose and effectiveness of returning to Luz to do a reconstruction. They also expressed concerns about the media furor that would be sparked by everyone's return to Praia de Luz. What was perhaps left unsaid was, if they returned, all of them would be at the mercy of the PJ, or in the case of Gerry and Kate, they'd be vulnerable to being detained or charged. Yeah, unless you're asking formally, diplomatically, for extradition, if I'm in their position, there's no fucking way that I'm going, guilty or innocent. No fucking way. The wheels of British bureaucracy ground slowly, and the McCann party were not interviewed until April 2008, and even then, they were interviewed by British officers reading Portuguese questions. The McCann party repeated the same information. Rebello continued to press the idea that a reenactment was necessary to confirm that the timing of the checks on the children added up. Why can't they just do it by phone? Just sit them down in a room with some British police officers and their lawyers, and have the Portuguese detectives call in. It's 2008, they could do a video, Skype or whatever we were using back then. Or just a regular phone call. The PJ case files from this time revealed that Rebello's investigators still found many of the statements made by the McCanns and their friends to be highly inconsistent with witness testimony from staff and other holidaymakers. Rebello continued to promise the McCann party that if they returned, the press would be kept at bay. However, by May 27th, Portuguese authorities had given up on the idea that the McCann party would ever return to Praia de Luz for a reenactment. The PJ concluded in their final report on June 30th, 2008 that, quote, given the tone of the witnesses' positions, there is no choice but to close the investigation. In other words, if the McCann party did not wish to assist them and prove the events of that evening went down exactly as they said, then there was little more the police could do. All right, well, yeah, again, it's like, do you want to come here and prove your innocence? Nope. Sounds like your job is to prove me guilty there, and you don't have that, so I'm not coming to prove my innocence. Thank you very much indeed. On July the 21st, 2008, over 14 months after Madeleine's disappearance, Portuguese authorities closed the case, dropping the arguido status of Gerry and Kate McCann and Robert Murat. The 57-page summary, prepared for the Portuguese Attorney General, rather venomously added, quote, we must also recognize that the parents have already paid a heavy penalty, the disappearance of Madeleine, due to their lack of carefulness in the watching and protection of their children. I mean, steady. How about you blame whoever the fuck took her? The case was archived, and the investigation records were made available to the public. 3 days after the case was shelved, on July the 24th, 2008, a new book hit the market. It was written by Gonçalo Amaral, now an ex-cop with a bone to pick with a few people. He hadn't been fired for investigating the McCanns. Indeed, Rebello and his team had also suspected the McCanns and continued to pursue the same leads. It wasn't even for making a false statement about his colleagues allegedly beating up a murder suspect in 2004, for which Amaral was later to get a suspended sentence in 2009, a year after it already left the police force. Gonçalo Amaral's 30-year career had originally been torpedoed for slagging off the British police in the press, and so the book called Maddie, The Truth of the Lie laid out the hypothesis that Madeleine had died of a drug overdose and that the McCanns had staged an abduction to cover up her death. It also speculated about British authorities willingly or inadvertently perverting the course of justice. The book sold 180,000 copies in just 3 months. In April 2009, it was turned into a documentary for Portuguese television and was watched by 2.2 million people, roughly a third of Portugal's adult viewing population. I feel like there is a lawsuit coming your way, my dude. The McCanns lawyered up, of course they did. In 2009, they won an injunction against Gonçalo Amaral's book, The injunction banned further sales, allowed authorities to seize the stockpile of existing copies from the publisher, and froze Amaral's assets, divesting him of the profits. Yeah, dude, what did you think was going to happen? Amaral challenged the ruling. In October 2010, the injunction was overturned by the Lisbon Court of Appeal. The book went back on the market. The McCanns sued again. In April 2015, they won a libel case against Amaral. He had to pay £430,000 in damages, and the book was banned again. This would have financially ruined him, but with roughly £100,000 in donations from mostly Portuguese and British supporters, Gonçalo Amaral challenged the ruling and won. The book went on sale again. The McCanns appealed the decision to the Portuguese Supreme Court in February 2017. It's like the decade after all of this went down. The judges ruled in Amaral's favor. In its 76-page ruling, the judges said that Amaral had not libeled the McCanns because, quote, it should not be said that the appellants, the McCanns, were cleared via the ruling announcing the archiving of the criminal case. The archiving of the case was determined by the fact that the public prosecutors hadn't managed to obtain sufficient evidence of crimes by the appellants. Even the archive ruling raises serious concerns relating to the truth of the allegation that Madeleine was kidnapped. The judges declared that Amaral's book had no defamatory intention and that it was quote-unquote defensive and informational. I haven't read the book, but I do disagree with it. It seems pretty fucking defamatory to me. Allegedly, the McCanns made a final appeal to the Supreme Court, which was rejected in March 2017. 12 seconds. All the way back on September 9th, 2007, when Jerry, Kate, and the twins returned to Britain without Madeleine, they had, to put it mildly, a mixed reception. It had been only a few days since they'd been declared arguidos. When Irish witness Martin Smith saw Jerry carrying one of the twins off a plane on TV, he phoned the police and said that Jerry was the man who'd seen 500 yards from the Ocean Club carrying a girl down Rua Escola Primera toward the beach at 10 p.m. on the night of the disappearance. What? You've never seen his face before? Like, I know what his face looks like because it was all over the news forever. We knew that Jerry was at the tapas restaurant at that time, so it couldn't have been him, and the man Smith saw has never been identified. But the news further intensified allegations of McCann's guilt. We don't have a poll or anything of British opinion in September 2007, but it's probably fair to say that it was split. The McCanns still had plenty of sympathetic supporters, but they also had a growing number of detractors in the media and online. It's perhaps telling that the celebrity donations and calls for information slowly began to dry up, as did corporate support from various organizations. Such was the cynical nature of the whole ordeal. Yeah, and the thing is, like, even if it's, say, 30% of people are like, they're guilty or they killed their daughter, even if 30% of people like that and you're a celebrity and you're donating to that cause, like, those 30% care a lot more than the other 70%. And those 30% might not show up to your next movie. So even if there's like a minority who have a much stronger opinion about something that you can just step back from, you're gonna step back from it. It's just how PR works. Back in May 2007, when the McCanns' plight had first gone viral, the notion of being seen to publicly donate money and rally support was regarded as a PR slam dunk. Everyone seemed to want to be associated with the cause. Now, days after the McCanns had been declared arguidos, not so much. But one man, Brian Kennedy, a self-made millionaire from the double-glazed window industry, just like, I don't know, was it just me? Not me, but like British people as a kid. You'd hear on the radio, always be adverts about double glazing. I wonder if it was this dude's. Like, buy one window, get 7 free. I think that was actually a thing. It was like, buy one and you'd get 7 free. It's like, all right, why don't we just price them reasonably? He was outraged at the news coverage implicating the McCanns in their own daughter's disappearance. On September the 12th, 3 days after the McCanns returned to the UK, the millionaire reached out to them. Brian Kennedy says he decided that the McCanns were innocent after listening Kate talk for about 12 seconds. It was Brian Kennedy who was the principal pillar of support for the Find Madeleine Fund and the McCanns' private investigative efforts for the next 4 years. Good for you, Brian, finding a cause you believe in and just fucking going for it with your money. I like that. The McCanns retained David Hughes as a PR advisor upon returning to the UK. They also invited Philip Hall, head of a PR firm, to come to Rothley to discuss his involvement in the case. One evening in September, Hall sat in the McCann's kitchen, listening to Jerry McCann talk about assigning 5 or 6 members of Hall's staff to the campaign. Philip Hall later said, quote, I felt very uncomfortable actually, talking about a missing child as some sort of PR exercise. Once Jerry McCann had finished outlining his proposal, Philip Hall claims that he said, Jerry, I think you got to be careful. I think it's too well-oiled a machine. I think the public will feel very uncomfortable about it. Yeah, good for you, PR person, being aware that PR can look too much like PR. The McCanns did not end up hiring Philip Hall's firm. Instead, they spoke to Brian Kennedy and got him to headhunt Clarence Mitchell, the press liaison from the British Cabinet Office. Quite high up in the old PR world there. The same one who had been recalled back in June. Oh, right, yes. Mitchell quit his job with the cabinet and came to work for the McCanns full-time. To a certain extent, the hiring of Mitchell backfired. As Hall had predicted, many of the press and public found having him represent the McCanns as too slick, too polished, too professional. Clarence Mitchell was an impenetrable wall of spin and prepared statements that one would expect to see between the public and a scandal-prone government, not between the public and two devastated parents who, nominally at least, had nothing to hide. The McCanns also hired Rogerio Alves, head of the Portuguese Bar Association. God damn, they went to the top, didn't they? To represent them on the ground in Lisbon and Praia da Luz. He dealt with the requests of Rebello's team and local media appearances, but so strong was the feeling in Portugal against the McCanns at the time that people would spit at Alves when they saw him in public. Dude, he's literally just doing his job. This is what he does. Shit. Only a few days after Brian Kennedy had signed on with the McCanns, they got a tip from a woman who claimed to have seen a small blonde child resembling Madeleine in Morocco on May 9th, 6 days after her disappearance. There was also a picture of the girl with a Moroccan woman. The thinking at the time was that seeing a blonde girl in Morocco must be highly unusual, so Brian Kennedy and his son Patrick flew out to Morocco on an impromptu amateur sleuthing mission to find the girl. They were immediately dismayed to discover that there were plenty of blonde children in Morocco. Then they located the girl in the photo, and it was not Madeleine McCann. I feel like something you could look up on the internet. Like, how many blonde people are there in Morocco? It'd be like, plenty. Oh, okay. Meanwhile, the British press were merciless towards the McCanns in the aftermath of them being declared arguidos. The Daily Star, that bastion of quality journalism, ran the headlines, "Maddie Mum sold her," and "Maddie Mum orgy fury." Oh my god, Daily Star. Me. The Daily Express ran, "Madeleine, it was her blood in her parents' car." Yeah, but we don't know that, Daily Express. The lawsuits are going to come your way, guys. What are you talking about? The Evening Standard went with, "Police believed mother killed Maddie." I mean, that's fine. The police did suspect them. I would have said police suspect, but believes a bigger headline, isn't it? I feel like injunction's going to come their way. There's going to be some money changing hands real soon, especially fucking Daily Star. Or, Daily Express is worse. It was Maddie's blood in her parents' car. You don't know that. You stating it like it's a fact, and it's not. Similar headlines were printed by other newspapers in Britain and around the world. The Daily Star's assertions about trafficking in orgies had zero foundation, but the Express and Standard headlines actually parroted information allegedly being fed to them by unidentified members of the Portuguese police. Yeah, that's not going to cut it, guys, because otherwise you could just be like, yeah, anonymous source, anytime you say something defamatory. It'd be like, yeah, Coca-Cola contains cat piss and crack cocaine. If I said that, it'd be like, and then obviously it's a joke, and then Coca-Cola would be like, no, I heard it from an insider source at Coca-Cola who I can't name. And Coca-Cola would be like, okay, I guess we got to drop it then. Obviously it doesn't work like that. Nevertheless, it was the papers and not the anonymous sources close to the investigation who would ultimately pay the price. Do you think it's in the millions? I feel like it could be in the millions. This is a huge fuck up. The McCanns sued, and in March 2008, the Daily Express settled, for £550,000. Jesus Christ, you know that they could have juiced it in court then. In addition to £375,000 in compensation divided among the so-called Tapas 7. The Express also had to print a front-page apology. Wow. Because normally they'll get something wrong, they'll pay someone off, and it'll be like a retraction on page 70 at the bottom. But they had to print a full front-page apology, saying that, quote, there was no evidence whatsoever that the McCanns had accidentally killed their daughter and covered it up. The Evening Standard settled for an undisclosed but presumably similar amount and also published an apology. The McCanns said they put their share of the money toward the Find Madeleine Fund. Yeah, fucking good. They deserved it. You can't just print defamatory shit like that and expect it to be okay. Just police believed mother killed Maddie. Allegedly. Daily Express, what the Oh, sorry, that was Evening Standard. In October 2007, the BBC reported that McCanns had used money from Madeleine's fund to make 2 mortgage payments on their house prior to them being declared arguidos. The McCanns were heavily criticised in the media. I think we mentioned this earlier, and I said it's like, well, they're not earning any money because they're not working. In December, the McCanns received an anonymous Christmas card in the post that read, "Jerry and Kate, how can you use money given by poor people in good faith to pay the mortgage on your mansion, you fucking thieving bastards? Your brat is dead because of your drunken arrogance. Shame on you. I curse you and your family to suffer forever. If you had any shame, you would accept responsibility for your daughter's disappearance and give all the money back. You are scum." Chill the fuck out. How can you use money by poor people given in good faith to pay your mortgage on your mansion? Do they live in a mansion? 1. 2, I mean, I don't know. I don't judge this so harshly. I'm just thinking, give me a super chat now. I'll use it to pay for my mansion. Cheated by private dicks. With the Portuguese considering them suspects and British authorities conducting no independent investigation of their own, the McCanns turned to private investigators to continue the search for Madeleine. First, Brian Kennedy hired Metodo 3, a Spanish detective firm, to spearhead the effort. Metodo 3 charged £50,000 a month for the next 8 months. God damn! Reportedly, up to 35 agents in Europe and Morocco were deployed, but according to the investigator on the ground in Praia da Luz, Julian Peribanes, only he investigated Madeleine's disappearance full-time. I mean, yeah, but $50,000 a month is a lot of money. But for 35 people to work part-time and one dude to work full-time plus all their travel expenses, I mean, it's a lot of money. It's crazy. But it's not unforeseeable how that money gets spent. I don't think anyone's getting scammed. Oh wait, the title of this thing is cheated by private dicks. I don't think that's outrageous. I don't think that's an outrageous bill. The first thing Metodo 3 did was set up a new hotline for tips. The McCanns launched a media campaign and did interviews in order to promote it. Thousands of Madeleine sightings poured in from 42 countries, including some as far afield as Zambia. None of them seemed to pan out. Brian Kennedy's son, Patrick, went out to Praia da Luz every now and then for a few weeks at a time to work with Metodo 3. He took part in stakeouts, helped Peribanes chase up tips, he looked into abandoned homes in the countryside. He investigated a suspicious owner of a pig farm. He tailed local PDF files and took note of their movements, ultimately with minimal results. One of the people Metodo 3 looked into was Robert Murat. Although he was a suspect in the disappearance, there was not much evidence tying him to it beyond accusations from the McCann party. Brian Kennedy decided to fly down to Praia da Luz to meet Murat in person. According to Robert Murat himself, quote, "I did meet with a gentleman named Brian Kennedy, who was a multi-millionaire who had links with the McCanns. He was there to find a solution to the story, and I assume believed I had something to do with it. Actually, I think there was an offer of a job or something because I couldn't get work. I had no chance of doing anything." Wow, that's odd. I quite like this Brian Kennedy character. He sounds like he made all this money, he retired, and now he's just like, cool, I'm going to get involved with this thing and try and fix it with my money. And like, respect, dude. Indeed, Kennedy later confirmed that he had offered Murat a job working for the Find Madeleine Fund, but not everything was as it seemed. To quote Murat, "I then found out that he had tried to bug the meeting with people in the garden trying to record the conversation." Why not just wear a wire like a normal person? He'd be like, "I want to search you." You'd be like, "No, you're not the police or some gangster who's going to put some concrete on my feet and throw me in the river." Murat later discovered that someone had allegedly placed GPS trackers on his vehicles, driven by him and his mother. Metodo 3 went to work on Sergei Milinka. Peribanes claimed that he offered Milinka €100,000 to talk, then upped that to €500,000. Milinka repeatedly refused the money, saying he didn't know anything. Then, to put things as carefully as possible, figures close to the private investigation have speculated that it was an agent working for Metodo 3 who firebombed Milinka's car and scrawled the word "fala" or "talk" in red paint on the sidewalk beside it. Jesus Christ. How do you bill for that? That's crazy. Allegedly. It seems a little bit of a stretch, doesn't it? Allegedly, Metodo 3 eventually moved on from Murat and Milinka, having uncovered nothing. Next, Metodo 3 investigated the reports of charity collectors from before Madeleine's disappearance who were trying to get donations for that fake orphanage in Espiche. Whoever these individuals were, they were obviously conmen. The descriptions of the ages and appearances of these men varied, so multiple people were likely involved in the scam, and on the off chance these con men were involved in the disappearance, that would imply a team of people, which in turn would imply human traffickers had abducted her, rather than an individual lunatic. This seems like a massive stretch. Do you think the people who are involved in human trafficking are also involved in like a small-time swindling people out of charity money, going door to door? Seems a little bit much, doesn't it? In addition to the witnesses who reported the fake collectors to the police back in spring 2007, another unidentified woman came forward the following year with a rather chilling claim. Just before Madeleine's disappearance, the woman was doing chores and watching her 3-year-old daughter in a house in Praia-da-Luz. A fake charity collector came to the door looking for money. He had tan skin, big teeth, and long, greasy, dark hair. When he gave the woman his spiel, the woman noticed he kept staring at her 3-year-old daughter. The witness claims that the next day she came downstairs with some laundry, only to find the same man standing in the middle of her living room staring at her daughter playing on the floor. What the man? Upon being spotted, the man immediately fled from the house. This certainly sounds like the type of person who would abduct a young girl from a hotel room, and it would connect the con men more firmly to Madeleine's disappearance. Can you imagine how fucking scary it would be just to come down and find some random creepy stranger in your house staring at your kids? I'd just be like, what the fuck is going, what hello? Get the fuck out of my house. The woman did not report the incident to the police at the time. Oh my God. Immediately after that happened, I'd phone the police. I'd be like, yo, you want to get around here? I got cameras. The claim filtered into investigators many months after Madeleine's disappearance, so it is open to question whether this woman is actually telling the truth. Either way, Metodo 3 began looking for a man of this description, which also roughly matched that of the unidentified predator who was entering people's hotel rooms and assaulting their young daughters. Oh, I forgot about that, from 2004 to 2010, right in the window when she disappeared. Unfortunately, the investigators came up empty. A suspect in the assaults, Euclides Monteiro, died in 2009, and Portuguese police were not able to tie him conclusively to any of the incidents. The description of the man who perpetrated more assaults after Monteiro's death was the same, so it probably wasn't him. Meanwhile, Metodo 3 investigated rumors of a PDF file network operating in Portugal. They started posing as predators on the dark web. Oh my God, that must be a miserable job having to read all these what these sickos are saying. Jesus. They somehow gained the confidence of the human detritus, posting on illicit message boards and trying to ferret information out of them. Oh, that just sounds anything about where Madeleine may have been taken, but none of the PDF files that investigators spoke to knew anything useful. However, as a bit of a silver lining, the investigators later submitted the data they had acquired from the dark web to Portuguese police. Several arrests of PDF files followed. Excellent. It's the we did this. You might also like this information. Boom! Prison! But by then, the McCanns had ceased to employ Metodo 3. In spring 2008, the director of the agency, Francisco Marco, gave an interview where he said, "We have the description of the woman and the man involved. Maddie was alive 2 days after the kidnapping. Madeleine was in a car, and she was given to another person inside Portugal. I'm not saying maybe. No. We are very, very close to finding the kidnapper." Marco repeated the claims to several more media outlets. Based on what? Why would they cease to employ them? And then the director of the agency says this. Is it to keep their business? If so, that's a massive ethical breach. According to Julian Peribanes, this was all bullshit. Marco had no idea where Madeleine was and didn't seem to care. Allegedly, Marco told Peribanes that he'd simply made the claims to get publicity for Metodo 3. Dude, if that's true, you sketchy little bastard. I mean, again, allegedly, if it's true. So many lies in today's episode. You can't tell the truth from the lies. According to Peribanes, Marco did not seriously think that Madeleine McCann would ever be found. Taking on the famous case was just a way to bolster his business. I mean, that I don't blame him for. Because it's okay, do I think she's going to be found? No. Am I going to look for her if you pay me? Yeah, that's what my job literally is. Brian Kennedy fired Metodo 3 and shifted his gaze to the impressive-looking firms in America. He wound up hiring Oakley International, which boasted agents who formerly worked for the CIA, FBI, and MI5. God damn, this is some big three-letter agencies right there. Oakley International cost £500,000 to hire the firm for 6 months, much of which had to be paid up front before any work would begin. And fair, this is a major company, a major investigative branch. I don't think it's unreasonable that they asked for a lot of money up front. The president of Oakley International was a man named Kevin Halligan, who claimed to be a former US intelligence operative. It turns out that he was actually an Irish citizen masquerading as an American, and all his intelligence credentials were fraudulent. Wait, this must have been a huge company. It must have been for them to find it and agree to pay £500,000 from someone who was a successful businessman who's, got an idea of how companies and money works. That's wild. So did this guy, Kevin, just pretend to be an American intelligence officer and then actually start a successful company? Or was the whole thing underneath him real? It says, oh, okay, but here we go. But some of Halligan's contractors were legitimate. Okay, there we go. What a weird con. He dispatched Henry Exton, a former police officer, and MI5 agents with a 5-man team to Praia da Luz to chase up leads. Halligan also claimed that he had dispatched a man-woman team with a child, Madeleine's age as bait, and also a spy posing as a drunken priest. Both of these claims were lies. As for Exton and the others, they collected testimonies and tracked suspects, but Halligan was slow to pay them, and often never paid them at all. He was embezzling most of the money. Allegedly or not allegedly? I'm just saying allegedly for now. It's a very serious accusation. Halligan kept sending invoices to Brian Kennedy despite minimal progress. At one point, Halligan told Kennedy that he had access to CIA satellite photos of Praia da Luz from the night of Madeleine's disappearance. Kennedy waited months to see them. Eventually, Halligan just turned in Google Earth images of the town. No fucking shot. Then Kennedy caught wind of the fact that tips from the hotline were being ignored. Angered, Kennedy tried to contact Halligan, but he was a difficult man to track down. Yeah, he managed to pretend to be an American, which I imagine is no easy feat. Those passports are probably quite hard to come by. Meanwhile, Henry Exton interviewed Irish tourist Martin Smith, who had seen a man carrying a little girl down the road toward the beach at 10 p.m. on May 3, 2007. In September, Smith had mistakenly identified him as Jerry McCann. In late 2008, Smith sat down with an artist who produced 2 electronic sketches, or EFITs. According to some commenters, they vaguely resemble Jerry McCann. In November 2008, Exton advised the McCanns to make the EFITs public. They decided not to, despite the fact that it would help identify a suspect. But the McCanns confidently handed over the EFITs to Leicestershire police roughly 11 months later, October 2009. The Sunday Times later printed a story implying the McCanns never gave the EFITs to the police, which is false. The McCanns sued the Times for £55,000. Okay, so Sunday Times is a much more reputable paper than the Express and the Star that we talked about earlier, and this seems like maybe they just got bad information rather than being intentionally defamatory, but I guess, or libelous. Written is libelous.
Spider-Man wasn't attacking the city. He was trying to save it. That's slander.
It is not. I resent that. Slander is spoken. In print, it's libel.
So I guess it's all the same in the end, isn't it? McCann sued the Times for £55,000, obviously way less. The EFITs were eventually made public in 2013 on an episode of the BBC's Crime Watch. In my opinion, they don't resemble Jerry McCann at all. The eye colour, shape of the nose, and shape of the skull are all wrong. They're worth looking at because in the view of British law enforcement today, the man Martin Smith saw carrying the girl that night remains the most solid link to a potential suspect, above all other tips and speculations. Well, holy shit, there we go. Meanwhile, with the relationship between Halligan and the Fine Madeline Fund at an all-time low, good, Halligan allegedly started blackmailing the McCanns. Allegedly, according to a 2019 Netflix documentary, he started threatening to expose the McCanns for something. It's not clear what that was. Shortly afterwards, Halligan fled to Italy, having embezzled approximately £300,000 of the fund's money. He was arrested by the FBI for fraud against a different client. Tried and convicted. Halligan died of a brain hemorrhage in 2018. Wait, did he go to prison? This was 2000. Oh, okay, so it was quite a bit later. So I guess maybe before? I don't know. Dude. What did you expect? Eventually it's going to catch up with you, dude. You're running a huge, scammy operation. And I don't think I have to say allegedly anymore because, well, 1, he's dead. And 2, he was convicted. Back in 2009, the McCanns hired private detectives David Edgar and Edward Cowley, who thankfully had more integrity than their predecessors. Edgar and Cowley made contact with a British man who claimed that while on the street in Barcelona at 2 a.m. on May 7, 2007, 3 days and 4 hours after Madeleine's disappearance, he encountered a well-dressed woman who spoke English, potentially with an Australian or New Zealand accent. She said, quote, "Have you come to deliver my daughter?" Then the woman seemed to realize the witness was not the man she was supposed to meet. She quietly walked away. The witness said the woman resembled Victoria Beckham. An EFIT was produced and released to the public. In the 15 years since, no identification has been made. Well, I think we all know what's going on here. Victoria Beckham bought Madeleine McCann. It's a wild ass. I bet there are people online who believe that. You could bet. If someone says something like that, you could bet there's a group of conspiracy theory people out there being like the Beckham truthers or whatever. If you Google Beckham conspiracy theories, I bet stuff comes up. A burst of hope, then a whimper. January 27, 2010 marked the 1,000th day since Madeleine had gone missing. She would have been 6 years old. That night, the Fine Madeline Fund hosted a £150 a head dinner to raise money for the continued search. In March 2010, Jerry and Kate McCann met the chief of CEOP, Jim Gamble, who put his suspicions of the McCanns behind him. Gamble suggested, this was the guy who the Jerry met with, right? Sorry, this was all before the weekends for me. Gamble suggested they write him a letter requesting a review of the case, which he could then forward to the British Home Office to start the ball rolling on an official inquiry. Shortly afterward, the Home Secretary, Alan Johnson, met with McCanns and got Jim Gamble to write up an evaluation of how the case was handled in 2007. Gamble says that Johnson was genuinely sympathetic to the McCanns for the loss of their daughter. Yeah, as you should be, because there's no evidence to say that they did anything. There just seems to be some public opinion that they might have. It'd be weird if you weren't sympathetic. The McCanns left nothing to chance and went on the warpath, keeping up their political pressure. In April 2010, Jerry and Kate gave an interview to BBC World Service where they appeared to be angry and impatient. Kate said, "If this was a murder inquiry, there'd be an active investigation. But as it stands, we have a predator who is still at large, and it potentially puts other children at risk." Wait, wasn't this a murder inquiry? In Portugal, didn't they switch it to a murder inquiry at some point? Jerry added, "Officially for 18 months, law enforcement have not proactively done anything to find Madeleine and who took her, and I just think this is fundamentally unacceptable." Meanwhile, the process of bringing about a British inquiry was already underway. A few weeks later, in May 2010, Jim Gamble produced a report critical of everyone involved, Portuguese and British. He said that the Portuguese should have investigated the McCanns first before going after people like Murat. Gamble criticised the Policia Judiciaria for thinking they had quote-unquote a silver bullet with the cadaver in the blood sense when it was clear from the start of September that the DNA tests would not back them up. In Gamble's view, rolling the dice on provoking a confession was a mistake. If Madeleine had not been abducted, but had been killed by her parents, there was less urgency to get to the bottom of things and more time to build a case. In turn, Gamble criticised the British authorities for not considering the forensics at all at the time. The British paid no attention to how inconclusive or conclusive they were. British law enforcement at the time seemed more concerned with jurisdictional squabbling between them and the Portuguese, and also between various British police organisations. Above all, Gamble skewered a lack of coordination between the various authorities. He recommended that in a future investigation, there must be much closer contact and information sharing between the British and Portuguese authorities involved. He advocated for a new inquiry led by Scotland Yard. Within days of the Gamble report landing on Alan Johnson's desk, the Labour government was thrown out of office in the 2010 general election. The McCanns met with the new Home Secretary, Theresa May. According to Jim Gamble, May, quote-unquote, hemmed and hawed over the prospect of opening a new investigation into Madeleine McCann. A year passed with no progress. Kate McCann set about writing a book, Madeleine, Our Daughter's Disappearance, and the continuing search for her, released in May 2011. Sales brought in an estimated £700,000, and the Sunday Times and Sun newspapers serialised it for a further payment of £500,000, all of which went to the Find Madeleine Fund. The book is still worth reading today, so you can get Kate's detailed version of events and occasional counter-arguments to the allegations made by the Portuguese police. The book closes by asking readers to write to Prime Minister David Cameron and Home Secretary Theresa May demanding a new investigation. The McCanns followed it up by running an open letter to the Prime Minister in The Sun on May 12th, Madeleine's 8th birthday. The strategy worked. Ooh, that's nice. A little bit of pressure on the PM there. On the evening of May 12th, the Prime Minister replied in a private letter to the McCanns promising help. And Theresa May, not the Prime Minister at the time, Foreign Secretary? Home Secretary? Home Secretary, sorry, yeah. In public, saying that she was setting up a new inquiry headed by Scotland Yard. This was Operation Grange. It involved 29 detectives and 8 support staff, led by Detective Chief Inspector Andy Redwood, a specialist in cold cases. The initial budget was £3.5 million. The Portuguese responded by opening their own investigation again, putting together a team that did not include anyone involved in the previous investigation. DCI Redwood made it clear that they were looking at the disappearance as a criminal act by a stranger, either an abduction or a robbery gone wrong. If anyone involved in Operation Grange ever considered the McCann theory, they certainly did not dare to publicize it or question any of the McCann party along those lines. Well, I feel like that was fairly exhaustively looked into and proved and determined to be inconclusive last time. With regard to the theory that Madeleine had been abducted or killed as a result of a robbery gone wrong, Operation Grange investigated the known suspects linked to a spate of burglaries in Praia de Luz during the first half of 2007. However, none of them could be connected to Madeleine's disappearance. In 2017, a senior official at Scotland Yard made a public statement saying that the robbery gone wrong theory was still plausible, but highly unlikely. They'd exhausted their suspects, and after all, nothing in apartment 5A was ransacked and nothing was taken except for Madeleine. Yes, I feel like this is the most unlikely of theories, but okay, gotta pursue all these options. You got £3.5 million to burn through. Operation Grange looked into tracking mobile phone use around the Ocean Club on the night of the disappearance. They interviewed 3 men, including a bus driver for the Ocean Club, before ruling them out in 2014, though the 3 men admitted to burglarizing several of the apartments at the resort. Scotland Yard also discovered that a former Ocean Club employee, Euclides Monteiro, had used his mobile phone near the resort that night. He died in 2009. Monteiro was a suspect for the nighttime assaults on little girls in the region, but the assaults continued for a year after his demise by a man of the same description. After that, his investigators hit a dead end. Yeah, we mentioned that earlier and how it's just unlikely to be him, right? Operation Grange detectives also attached a great amount of weight to reports of a man, or indeed multiple men, staking out apartment 5A in the run-up to Madeleine's disappearance. In 2013, a public awareness campaign was launched to track down the fair-haired man with pimples seen by 2 separate witnesses acting suspiciously at the Ocean Club. The campaign failed, although one tenuous suspect was Urs Hans von Aisch, a Swiss citizen living in Spain, in May 2007. A few months later, on July 31st, Aisch was implicated in the abduction and murder of a 5-year-old girl in Switzerland, with DNA linking him to the crime. However, Aisch shot himself the day after the abduction. The theory goes that in May 2007, Aisch may have travelled to the Algarve, where his family was staying at the time, and abducted and killed Madeleine. But there was no evidence connecting Aisch to McCann's or anything that places him in Portugal. Journalists talk about a white van with Aisch's registration, but police said that this was utter bullshit. Okay, I mean, again, possible but extremely unlikely. I'd give that one. In June 2014, Operation Grange performed a joint Anglo-Portuguese excavation of 15 acres of scrubland in Praia de Luz, but found nothing. Jesus, 15 acres, that's a big spot of land to dig up. In December 2013, Scotland Yard and the Polícia Judiciária interviewed 11 people in connection with the disappearance. One of these people was Robert Murat, who after 7 years remained on the police's radar even though the McCanns did not. Perhaps unsurprisingly, Murat did not reveal any new information. This Murat guy, who seems to be innocent, is being badgered about this for years afterwards. That sucks. By October 2015, Operation Grange had chased up 8,000 tips, conducted 1,338 interviews, collected over 1,000 pieces of evidence, looked into 650 sex offenders, and investigated 60 suspects. Unfortunately, no decisive leads were found. By that point, the cost of Operation Grange amounted to approximately £11.5 million. So much for that $3.5 million, huh? The investigation was scaled back to just 4 investigators, with further injections of around £100,000 to £150,000 every 6 months or so. And again, yeah, because there's not an infinite money provider. It's like that money that is being sent to them to investigate this is being taken away from investigating other potential crimes. In 2016, Operation Grange briefly looked into British broadcaster Clement Freud, who had lived in Praia de Luz and interacted with McCann's in July 2007. Freud died in 2009, but in 2016, allegations surfaced that he had been involved in the abuse of underage girls from the 1970s onwards. However, no further evidence tied Freud to the abduction of Madeleine McCann. In 2019, the British government announced that they would no longer fund Operation Grange past March 2020. By that point, Madeleine McCann had been missing for 12 years and 10 months. As the Scotland Yard inquiry withered on the vine, the McCanns did not launch another large-scale private investigation of their own, nor wage another aggressive PR campaign. They also refused to take part in the 2019 Netflix documentary, despite the fact that it promised to be a renewed burst of energy for the search and put Madeleine's face on millions of television screens again. Some commentators speculated that the fight had largely gone out of the McCanns after their loss to Gonçalo Amaral in the Portuguese Supreme Court back in 2017. Other detractors on social media claimed that the McCanns no longer needed to put up a performance to rehabilitate their damaged reputations. Suspicions of the McCanns in Britain largely dropped after 2011. Only in Portugal did a sizable chunk of the population still believe that the McCanns were behind the disappearance of their daughter. Meet Christian Brueckner. Wow, it is late in the day to introduce possibly, this is how David always describes the new suspects, meet so-and-so. Late in the day to be introducing someone new, but let's have a look. We've got 3 pages left. Shortly before being shelved, Operation Grange received a fresh breath of life in June 2020. A German prosecutor announced that he had concrete evidence that a man, I do remember this in the papers. I mean papers, like BBC.com. that a man named Christian Brueckner had kidnapped and murdered Madeleine McCann. Around the date of Madeleine's disappearance, Brueckner, who was then 30, was living in Praia de Luz in a Volkswagen Westphalia campervan. With blonde hair and a pockmarked face, Brueckner fit the description given by two witnesses who saw someone lurking around apartment 5A, possibly doing a reconnaissance before striking. Brueckner had a rap sheet for 17 burglaries, drug trafficking, and several incidents involving the abuse of young girls. Why wouldn't he have been looked into earlier when they were looking into all the PDF files in the region? I'm assuming that abuse of young girls qualifies him for that. He was also suspected in several child disappearances and other sex crimes in Portugal between 2000 and 2017. Wait, he's 30? Jesus Christ, that is a big rap sheet. Oh, I'm sorry. So he was 30 when Sorry, I'm just reading back here. He was 30 when Madeleine disappeared, but obviously this is up till 2017, I think. Brueckner had been convicted in 2019 for the rape of a 72-year-old American woman in the Algarve in 2005. What the fuck is wrong with you? In 2022, when German prosecutors accused him of kidnapping Madeleine, he was already serving a 7-year prison sentence for the rape, which has struck many foreign observers as extraordinarily light. Yes, indeed. The British government deemed the news from Germany as sufficient enough to keep Operation Grange going just a little while longer. Christian Brueckner became a suspect in McCann case when German police discovered his mobile phone had received a 30-minute call near the Ocean Club during the daytime on May 3, 2007, several hours before Madeleine's disappearance. I don't know if does that add anything? What does that add? Because this guy feels like, just a sicko lone wolf. Police do not know who made this call, but they do have the number, now no longer in use. A British woman who Brueckner was dating at the time claims that the night before, on May 2nd, he allegedly said to her, "I have a job to do in Praia de Luz tomorrow. It's a horrible job, but it's something I have to do, and it will change my life." The German prosecutor hypothesized that Brueckner originally intended to burglarize apartment 5A, but for what? He's going to burglarize some middle-class family's hotel room? For what? Maybe a nice-ish watch? A mobile phone? I don't know. It's not going to change your life. But upon discovering the children were left to sleep in the room alone, his intentions allegedly turned predatory. The day after the disappearance, Brueckner's car was registered to a new owner, possibly to put some distance between himself and the vehicle in which Madeleine could have been transported. No forensic evidence of Madeleine has been found in the vehicle. Brueckner, meanwhile, has an alibi. He claims to have been miles away with a young German woman, her parents, on the night of the disappearance. On May 4th, Brueckner drove them to the airport in Faro for their flight home. According to Sky News, the four people were stopped and photographed at a police roadblock. Then Brueckner sold his car. A 2023 news report claims that Brueckner's phone was still in Praia de Luz at around 10 p.m. on May 3rd, but that has not been verified. On July 27, 2020, German police excavated an allotment in Hanover associated with Brueckner and found nothing. The investigation stalled. Over a year later, in October 2021, the German prosecutor told the media that he had no DNA evidence, but he was 100% sure Brueckner had abducted and killed Madeleine McCann. Okay. Meanwhile, the prosecutor refused to show the concrete evidence he had to Jerry and Kate McCann, arguing it would take away all hope that Madeleine was alive. Bro, I think they'd rather know. The German prosecutor also criticized the Portuguese police, saying, "What takes 1 month in Germany can take 6 months in Portugal." Yeah, but Germany also, you're famously efficient, Germany. 1 month in Germany is 6 months everywhere else. The German prosecutor boasted in October 2021 that he would probably charge Brueckner in 2022. He did not. The cited cause of the delay was a jurisdictional issue over which German court would be responsible for Brueckner's trial. Although his many alleged crimes happened in Portugal, the Germans seemed to get their way over the Portuguese. Yeah, again, it's like Gordon Brown leaning on someone. Germany's also really big and powerful. A most jurisdictional issue explains about a year's delay. It does not explain why, over 3 years later, in December 2024, Brueckner has still not been charged for the abduction of Madeleine McCann, and he has been charged and tried in the interim for other crimes he allegedly committed in Portugal. It might imply that the evidence the German prosecutor had is not as concrete as he made out in 2020 and 2021. Just tell us what the evidence is! On April 22nd, 2022, the Polícia Judiciária declared Christian Brueckner arguido, making it possible to extradite him to Portugal for questioning. At the time of writing, they have not found it necessary. From May 23rd to the 25th, 2023, Portuguese, German, and British police conducted a ground search near Arade Dam, 30 miles from Praia de Luz, because a child's sock had been found in the area during a previous search in 2008. Because the investigation stalled, Operation Grange was wound down again in 2023. In the autumn of 2024, Very recently, Brueckner was put on trial in Germany for 5 other offences committed in Portugal between 2000 and 2017, 3 charges of aggravated rape of adult women and 2 charges of abuse of children. In the former, he allegedly broke into women's hotel rooms to carry out the assaults. In the latter, he allegedly exposed himself to an 11-year-old Portuguese girl and a 10-year-old German girl in public. The prosecution asked for an additional 15 years to be added to his 7-year sentence. Again, extraordinarily light given the severity of the 5 crimes. Yep, this guy is a serial rapist. He's not going to go to prison. It's not going to make him better. Put him in prison and throw away the key. At trial, there was witness testimony, but no forensic evidence for any of the charges, and on October 8, 2024, Brueckner was acquitted. It does not bode well for the McCann case, for which he has not even been charged. Brueckner will be getting early release on his 7-year sentence for the rape of the 72-year-old American woman in September 2025. If the German prosecution actually has concrete evidence implicating Brueckner in the McCann case, wait, oh, he was acquitted. Wait, for all of them? For all of them? Bruh. They could bring charges against him to try and keep him off the streets. Better late than never. However, it is possible that the evidence against Brueckner for the McCann case is not concrete, and this is another instance of prosecutorial grandstanding, the practice of a prosecutor associating themselves with a famous case in order to advance their career. I'm not saying that is the situation, but I will not be reporting the prosecutor's name in this script. If charges are successfully brought against Brueckner in 2025, I'll happily report it then in a follow-up video. At which point, the world will know what happened to Madeleine and her family. I could get some long-awaited closure. Walking with Sorrow. On May the 3rd, 2023, Kate and Jerry McCann, their 18-year-old daughter Amelie, and a crowd of 70 well-wishers and supporters gathered in the village of Rothley to mark the 16th anniversary of Madeleine McCann's disappearance. Fiona Payne of the McCann party was among the crowd. Madeleine's brother Sean was not able to attend. The crowd lit candles, said an informal prayer, and repeated the phrases, "Never give up, leave no stone unturned," and "Still missing, still missed." Kate and Jerry did not address the crowd directly, but Amelie McCann, only 2 years old in May 2007, and now about to enter university, told the people gathered, "It's nice that everyone is here, but it's a sad occasion." At the time of writing, in December 2024, Madeleine McCann would be 21 years old. Jim Gamble, head of child exploitation and online prosecution command, once told a story of how he had come into that particular line of work. In the early 90s, he was a hotshot officer working in counterterrorism. He received a job offer to work in child protection, which he viewed as a step down. But Gamble took a trip to Southeast Asia, where he saw child victims of the worst outrages and atrocities. Children living in poverty, used and abused by monsters, and then discarded into the streets to die of poor health and easily preventable diseases. It shook him. On the flight home, Gamble decided he didn't care if moving out of counterterrorism was a so-called step down. Thousands of kids needed help. He could make a difference in the lives of the world's most vulnerable. His shining career be damned. What a legend. Wow, good for fucking you. Not a lot of people would do that, my dude, and you did. Fucking props. Some things you just have to put ahead of yourself and your own happiness. As Gamble thought about this, a poem by Robert Browning Hamilton drifted into his mind, and it seemed appropriate to leave you with it today. I walked a mile with pleasure, she chattered all the way, but left me none the wiser for all she had to say. I walked a mile with sorrow, and ne'er a word said she, but oh, the things I learned that day, when sorrow walked with me. God, that's really nice. I'm not a huge poetry person, but that is really nice. Dismembered appendices. Number 1. If any of the 620,000 plus subscribers of this channel, plus the Spotify folks, the podcast crew, hello there, have genuine information about Madeleine McCann's disappearance, they can email the police judiciaria at dic.portimao, spelled Portimao, at pj.pt. The Find Madeleine Fund at investigations@findmadeleine.com, or the still operational Metropolitan Police tip line at operation.grange at met.police.uk. Or you can file a report through London Met's automated system on their website. Number 2. Madeleine McCann thoroughly disliked being called Maddie and preferred to be called her full name. As such, apart from quoting a few newspaper headlines, the script has referred to her solely as Madeleine. Not much else to add there, really, is there? I think I've expressed myself and how I feel about this all the way through, and that's where we're going to end today's episode. Thank you for being here.